Chapter 687. Su Ming's expression remained the same, but he narrowed his eyes slightly. In his head, the scene of Hong Luo controlling his body and fighting against that hidden dragon sect cultivator appeared. During that battle, the one who killed that hidden dragon sect cultivator was not Hong Luo, but the terrifying halberd that appeared in the sky. The appearance of that halberd had intimidated all the immortals in the land of South Morning, causing them to feel as if their breathing had frozen at that instant. That halberd was the berserker's sacred vessel in the land of South Morning. Ever since Su Ming came to Eastern Wastelands and learned about Evil Spirit Sect, he had been wondering about this question. At that moment, he understood. Yet once he understood this, he remembered Dtion. Dtion's clone could ignore the berserker's sacred vessel in the past, but he did not choose to destroy it. Clearly, there was something he was wary of. Evil immortal sects, G, and actually had the ability to change the pattern of the berserker's sacred vessel's descent in Eastern Wastelands. This ability was so strong that forcefully changing the sacred vessel might be even more difficult than destroying it. But the sacred vessel was still around. Because of that, when he remembered Dtion's actions, Su Ming suddenly had a feeling that there was definitely some sort of secret contained within the berserker's sacred vessel, which was why the immortals did not dare to destroy it. This Jian sure is bold. He actually used the sacred vessel to descend once every 50 years as a trial for the direct disciples of evil sect to survive. As Su Ming opened his eyes, he understood many things. He also remembered that the Celestial Maiden was not a name, but a title. It was a title used by a group of people. These people came from all the sects and clans. Their mission was to help the descending tribe members to cover up the berserker's sky so that they could hide their presences. But it was clear that the Celestial Maiden's purpose was not just that an evil sect. Su Ming cast Bao Qiu a glance and asked languidly, "How confident are you? I was supposed to be 7/10. After all, I'm not the only one fighting against the berserker's disaster. There are quite a number of people in the sect who are fighting against it as well. I only need to withstand one strike. Besides, I have a clone who will die in my place. I intended to use my clone's death and my own injuries in exchange for success. But now, I only have 3/10." Bao Qiu's expression was calm, as if she was not talking about her own survival. Su Ming fell into a moment of pensive silence, then cast Bao Qiu a glance and laughed. "If you want my help, just say it. Why are you acting so hesitant?" Bao Qiu's face turned slightly red, but she quickly returned to normal and did not say anything. She indeed needed his help. Otherwise, she would be erased, and at the same time, he would not be able to cultivate in peace. This thought had appeared in her head a few months ago when she noticed just how terrifying Su Ming was. She was not trying to harm him, which was why it did not go against the shackles placed on her soul. This time, the reason why she had restored her original beauty was also to prepare for the words she had just said, "I will help you during the berserker's disaster 3 months later. Consider it as compensation for imprisoning your soul and forcing you to train in this place. After this, we will no longer owe each other anything." Su Ming closed his eyes. The light flashed briefly on Bao Qiu's face. Once she got up, she wrapped her fist in her palm and bowed towards Su Ming, then left the 2-story building and returned to the first floor that belonged to her. She sat down cross-legged, and no one knew what she was thinking about. After some time, she closed her eyes and started meditating. Su Ming's training did not stop because of this. He had already made up his mind about how he should help Bao Qiu, and he also wanted to use this chance to see whether his guess was correct. If my guess is correct, then I'll have to ask Bao Qiu about it. Su Ming no longer thought about this and instead immersed himself in recovering his cultivation base. At that moment, all his flesh, blood, and bones had turned into that of a berserker. His level of cultivation had also reached its peak in the past. As time passed by and his cultivation base recovered bit by bit, he gradually noticed that the extra 2/10 of cultivation base that was not his flesh, blood, and bones had been absorbed by his mind. Perhaps more accurately speaking, the thing that absorbed that 2/10 of his cultivation base was his soul. When Su Ming discovered this phenomenon, his heart trembled. He had a vague feeling that this 2/10 increase in his cultivation base was the key to whether or not he could take that step forward and become a berserker in the berserker soul realm. All of this made him remember the song of the Sun that had echoed in his ears before he fell unconscious after his battle against Yi Tian. 1 month, 2 months, 2 months later, Su Ming's cultivation base slowly increased and recovered. His soul gradually sank into an indescribable feeling, as if it had fallen asleep. It was as if it was being nourished. When another 20-something days went by, and there were only 3 days left until the berserker's disaster would arrive, Bao Qiu walked up slowly from the first floor of the building and appeared before Su Ming. Her expression was still rather calm, and she did not have the pale look of someone who only had 3 days left. She cast a glance at Su Ming and sat down quietly. She had returned to the appearance of a young girl, and at that moment, she looked holy and beautiful. She looked at the sky outside, the building quietly, and waited for Su Ming to wake up. She had been together with Su Ming for most of the year, and this boy before her had always been a mystery to her. At that moment, she averted her gaze from the window and looked at Su Ming once again. As she looked at him, she suddenly noticed that this Chun Su was slightly different from before. He seemed to have grown up slightly. He no longer looked like he was 12 or 13 years old, but 14 or 15 years old. When he closed his eyes, there was still a hint of youthfulness on his face, but she could not forget the ancient look in his eyes when he opened them. There was a hint of grief contained within that ancient look, and it would appear faintly and indistinctly under the red rays of the sun when the sun set. Just what sort of secret is on him? Just who is he? He's definitely not called Chen Su. What's his name? Where did he come from? He has such great power, so he shouldn't be some nameless person, just who could injure him so badly. These questions had continuously surfaced in Bao Qiu's heart during the past half a year. She started becoming curious towards this boy. It was especially so for his black hair. At that moment, the color was gradually fading away, and she could vaguely see white and purple hair. Not only did this mottled hair not give off a disheveled air, it instead gave off an air of strangeness, causing others to overlook his age. It was as if they were looking at a young man who was steady and experienced. Bao Qiu supported her chin with her hands and continued watching him like that, as if she had forgotten that 3 days later would be the end of her life. When the red rays of the sun outside faded away and darkness descended, the sky became bright once again. Su Ming was still meditating, and Bao Qiu was still watching him. When noon passed and the red rays of the sun shone through the window, once again, they landed on their bodies, and Su Ming opened his eyes. At the instant he did so, he saw Bao Qiu staring at him intently. He saw the red rays of the sun reflecting on her face, creating a beautiful picture. The woman in the picture had a head full of black hair and was dressed in a pink robe. She supported her chin with her hands, and her eyelashes were very long. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at him. In the red rays of the sun, even the fine hairs on the woman's face could be seen clearly. Her skin, which was gradually turning red, was hidden in the red rays of the sun, so no one could see it. I'm looking at you because you left a brand in my soul, causing me to be attracted to you without my knowledge and feel a sense of intimacy towards you. Once the brand disappears, these things will no longer appear, and everything will return to normal. Don't misunderstand. Bao Qiu did not avoid Su Ming's gaze. She looked at him and tried her best to speak as calmly as possible. Su Ming smiled faintly and did not speak. If you misunderstand, then that's your problem. It has nothing to do with me. I hope that you can fulfill your promise and return me my freedom once your cultivation base is restored. Bao Qiu's heart raced against her chest. She kept a straight face and spoke without any expression on her face. However, even though the red rays of the sun had moved away, her face was still slightly red. Honestly, I still like your current appearance. You're much better than the old woman you were in the past, Su Ming said with a smile. There was not much underlying meaning behind his words. He was only stating a fact. However, when Bao Qiu heard it, it sounded a little different. She glared at him, but the intimacy that came from her soul and the fact that she would not allow anyone to fight back against him caused her expression to instantly become gentle. She still did not avert her gaze and continued looking at Su Ming. Just like that, time passed by once again. When it was already night outside and midnight arrived on the third day, Su Ming started feeling a little awkward. He might have gone through a lot of things, but he had never met a woman like Bao Qiu who would stare straight at him, and it was not just for a moment, but for a long period of time. With a fake cough, Su Ming decided to close his eyes and continue meditating. Soon, midnight arrived. At the instant it was about to be over, Bao Qiu averted her gaze and looked towards the dark sky outside the window. At that moment, there were a dozen-something people in Evil Spirit Sect who were also looking towards the sky. All of them were sitting quietly in their own houses and looking at the sky. In fact, at the top of the mountain where Evil Spirit Sect was located was a ghastly temple that was shrouded in black smoke that would not dissipate all year round. There were a few indistinct statues worshipped in that temple, and there was a middle-aged man sitting cross-legged in it. That man was dressed in a long blue robe, and he was naturally the strongest person in Evil Spirit Sect, Grand Sect Elder Shindong. That black smoke was spreading out from his presence, and it symbolized his level of cultivation. It was equivalent to a berserker who had attained great completion in the berserker soul realm, which was also equivalent to the immortals in ascendance. 50 years. How fast? His voice was hoarse, and as he spoke languidly, he lifted his head and looked towards the sky. At that instant, a powerful and stable power that belonged to a powerful cultivation base erupted forth from his body with a bang. At the same time, the dozen-something people in Evil Spirit Sect, including Bao Qiu's, released their presences from different spots. Those were the immortals' presences, the presences of those who had descended to this world. There were also some berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance, and in the midst of fear, silence, arrogance, or grief, they spread out the ripples of their cultivation bases, causing the presences of the outsiders in Evil Spirit Sect to surge into the clouds. I would like to ask for leave from all of you for 3 days. I'll be going to Shanghai on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and most of the authors will be going there. I can only update once a day during this period, but I will make up for it. Please, all of you, please forgive me and allow me to ask for leave. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 688. Evil Spirit Sect was not the only one doing this. At that moment, Evil Dust Sect and Evil Lust Sect were doing the same thing in Eastern Wastelands. They exuded the presences that belonged to those who had descended to Eastern Wastelands, and their presences swept up the sky. It was as if they were afraid that the Berserker's sacred vessel would not notice them. As their presences swept up the area, the weather in the entire eastern part of Eastern Wastelands changed, and thunder rumbled in the air. As the world changed, a large amount of powerful presences also rushed into the sky from Evil Immortal Sect, which was the core of Evil Sect. What is Evil Sect? When the Berserker's disaster falls on all sides, only those of Evil Sect will stand above the world and have the courage to fight against the Berserker's disaster. At this moment, we will let all the people in the area see that not only will we of Evil Sect do what they don't dare to do, we will also face it. Since we've come to the land of Berserkers, if we fear the Berserker's disaster and avoid it, it would be better if we didn't come at all. A ghastly voice spread out from Evil Immortal Sect and reverberated in the area. It turned into a thunderous roar that spread through all the evil sects in Eastern Wastelands. Compared to the eastern part of Eastern Wastelands, the other 4 regions formed a stark contrast. It did not matter whether it was Great Leaf Immortal Sect, where Dtion was, or the other sects in the immortal world. None of them revealed their presences at that moment. Clearly, they wanted to avoid the day that would make the Berserker's sacred vessel fall asleep once again. Perhaps their choice was correct, and perhaps Evil Sect's actions were insane, but just this one matter alone was enough to show just how different their ideals were. One wanted to fight against the Berserker's disaster in an upright manner, and the other wanted to avoid the disaster with a ghastly gaze before putting on a ferocious expression. They were like a tiger fighting against a pack of wolves. When a tiger ran into an enemy, it would usually pounce on the enemy with its momentum and rarely retreat. However, when a pack of wolves ran into an enemy, most of them would linger around the area. Occasionally, they would attack, and their attacks were filled with malice. Almost at the same time, the four evil sects spread out their presences in the eastern part of Eastern Wastelands. A loud sound that shook the sky and earth suddenly came from the sky. As it did so, a gigantic crack was torn open in the sky. It was as if there was an unstoppable sharpness in the sky. That sharpness cut through the sky and revealed a gigantic crack that was hundreds of thousands of feet long. When the crack appeared, it looked like a scar that existed in the sky. It was as if the sky was going to be completely torn apart. As the crack appeared, a powerful pressure descended from the crack. As it swept out, it covered the entire Eastern Wastelands. Within Evil Spirit Sect, Su Ming's eyes flew open, and he lifted his head to look at the crack in the sky. He could sense the presence of that mighty pressure. In fact, the strength of that mighty pressure had already surpassed that of South Morning's sacred vessel, the long halberd. Bao Qiu was trembling by the side, and her face instantly turned pale. Su Ming did not feel too much fear from this mighty pressure, because his body had already completely turned into that of a berserker. But Bao Qiu was different. She did not belong to the land of berserkers. She was an outsider, and the moment she sensed the mighty pressure spreading out from the crack in the sky, her heart immediately trembled. A great wave of terror descended on her uncontrollably, as if there was a mountain that could not be destroyed pressing down on her with loud booming sounds. She could not put up much of a fight under that mighty pressure. It was as if everything was already set in stone, that she would be crushed to death by this sacred vessel of Eastern Wastelands. It's just the mighty pressure that has just appeared, and it already possesses such power. But it's not as if these people from Evil Sect who descended here can't fight against this pressure, or else they would have died a long time ago under the sacred vessel when they descended in the past. That Jian from Evil Sect wouldn't have allowed those from Evil Sect to use this as a trial either. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. He did not take any action to help her. Bao Qiu's hands were swiftly forming seals as she trembled, and gradually, a sacred light spread out from her body. Su Ming stood up and no longer meditated. At that moment, the power of the world in this place had become chaotic due to the change in the sky, and it was no longer suitable for cultivation. Once he stood up, Su Ming walked to the window of the tower and lifted his head to look at the sky before narrowing his eyes. He could vaguely sense that once the crack in the sky appeared, all the spiritual aura in the entire mountain seemed to have been sucked in, and all of it tumbled backwards towards the crack in the sky. The mountain was not the only one in this state. More accurately speaking, the entire Eastern Wastelands was in the same state. An endless amount of spiritual aura surged towards the sky in an invisible manner and was devoured by the crack. It was as if the berserker's sacred vessel within the crack needed to use this vast amount of spiritual aura to awaken. Su Ming stood there and watched quietly. Bao Qiu's body was still trembling as she sat behind him, a telling sign that she was resisting the pressure with all her might. Time trickled by slowly. The pressure grew stronger, and eventually, it looked as if it had gained physical form, causing the sky in Su Ming's eyes to distort and even become blurry for an instant. Suddenly, a clear and drawn-out sound that seemed to be made of metal came from the sky. That sound was like a knock, and when it traveled outwards, it reverberated through the entire Eastern Wastelands. It made it difficult for anyone to tell just what sort of sound it was. Almost at the instant that knock reverberated in the air, Bao Qiu's body froze, and blood flowed out of the corners of her mouth. Her face turned even paler, and as she moved her hands, she tapped a few spots on her body in succession. Only then did she stabilize her cultivation base, which had become chaotic due to that sound. The entire Evil Spirit Sect fell into dead silence at that moment. At the instant that sound appeared, Many of the berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance coughed up blood. Some of them even fell unconscious as they trembled. Only the pure-blooded evil sect berserkers who descended to this place gritted their teeth and persevered as that sound reverberated in the air. They put up different forms of resistance based on their levels of cultivation. Shindong, the grand sect elder who was dressed in a long blue robe, was meditating in the black smoke at the top of Evil Spirit Sect's mountain. His expression remained the same, and not a single hint of change could be detected on his face. It was as if that sound that had caused many people's hearts to tremble was just a normal thing to him. Almost at the instant that sound spread out and reverberated in the world, a similar scene appeared in all 4 evil sects in Eastern Wastelands. All the berserkers who descended to this place were fighting back. The berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance might have done so out of survival, or because they chased after power, or for some other reason, but they had changed their blood inheritance so that they could practice evil sex arts, and the price they had to pay for it was incredibly great. This price made them unworthy of being called berserkers. They were reduced to second-class beings in evil sect, and the berserkers' disaster that came once every 50 years was especially so. The blows they had to endure were far greater than those of the berserkers who descended to this place. It was as if the berserkers' sacred vessel loathed people like them. Every single time the berserkers' disaster came, there would be a large number of half-berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance who died. Evil Sect was not the only one affected by that sound. As the knocking sound reverberated in the air, it also reached the other immortal sects in Eastern Wastelands. However, since the immortals who descended to this place hid themselves, they did not suffer too much damage. However, the blow to their hearts and the mysteriousness of the berserkers would increase once every 50 years. Murmurs could also be heard coming from the sects that did not fight back as madly as Evil Sect. All of these voices belonged to women, and as they rose into the air languidly, a blood-red screen of light enveloped these sections. This blood-red screen of light seemed to be able to cover the sky of the land of berserkers, causing the berserkers' sacred vessel in the sky to have a hard time finding their tracks. This blood-red screen of light was something all the immortals who descended to the land of berserkers had to possess. This was the divine ability of the celestial maidens, and it was also their use. There were 8 women dressed in white among the sects that descended to this place at that moment. All of these women were beautiful, and their eyes were closed at that moment. They had their arms spread out, and before them was a small red bottle. Within those bottles were drops of blood that were incredibly precious to them and the entire immortal race. At the end of the day, the reason why they could cover the sky of the land of berserkers was because of this blood. The celestial maidens were the only ones who could spread out some of the power of their blood and cover the sky. They were the only ones who could do this. No one else could do it. There were celestial maidens in Evil Sect as well, but their use was not to cover the sky of the berserkers. Instead, under Jian's request, they had other uses. At that moment, the sound in the sky gradually faded away, but soon after, the second similar sound rang out with a bang. That sound seemed to have traveled even closer to the ground, and waves of dark light shone from the crack in the sky. As that dark light shone, it looked as if something was slowly revealing itself from within the crack. The second echo caused the immortals from Evil Sect to be even more shocked. Bao Qiu formed a seal with her hands and pointed forward. Immediately, an illusion appeared before her, and it was a statue that was exactly the same as the one on the lotus platform on the first floor. After the statue appeared, Bao Qiu's expression became slightly better. However, almost at the same time, the third, fourth, and fifth echoes rang out in the sky with a loud rumble. The moment this voice rang out, the dark light within the giant crack in the sky became several times stronger. It illuminated the land, causing the entire sky to seem to be covered by it. Under this light, the crack could not be seen, and the blue sky could not be seen. The only thing that could be seen was a circular object slowly descending from the sky within the dark light. It was a gigantic bell. It might have seemed round, but that was only its edge. As that thing descended and Su Ming saw its entire form clearly, A loud bang that shook the sky and earth rang out in his head. He took a step forward, and if he had not instinctively held himself back, he would have walked out of the tower. On Mountain Bell, Su Ming widened his eyes, and disbelief appeared on his face. His breathing quickened at that instant. The Berserker's sacred vessel in the sky was incredibly similar to Han Mountain Bell. However, there was also a difference. The only difference was that there was no picture of the nine-headed dragon on the Berserker's sacred vessel in the sky. Instead, half of it was filled with endless mountains and rivers, and the other half was a desert. I saw Yumu. He's a very forthright lad, and he's young and promising. I'll go home tomorrow night, and the update will resume the day after tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 689. Great Desert Eastern Wastelands Bell. This is Eastern Wastelands' sacred vessel, the Berserkers. Bao Qiu's hoarse voice came from behind Su Ming intermittently. Her voice was incredibly weak, and the illusory statue before her was also trembling faintly, as if it was about to shatter at any moment once the bell appeared. Su Ming's breathing quickened slightly, and he only managed to calm down after some time. He looked at the gigantic Eastern Wastelands bell in the sky, and a powerful wave of heat appeared in his eyes. He finally realized what that sound was. It was the bell chime that came from within the crack. However, because of the obstruction of the crack, and because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth kept pouring in, the bell chime sounded different to the ears of those who heard it. Yet when he thought about it, that sound was clearly bell chime. Almost at the instant Eastern Wasteland's bell descended from the sky, 8 women dressed in white appeared in each of the evil sects in Eastern Wastelands. It was the same for Evil Spirit Sect. 8 women dressed in white floated into the air, and judging by their expressions, they looked as if they were not affected much by the pressure coming from Eastern Wasteland's bell. Each of these 8 women was beautiful, and there was an indescribable presence surrounding their bodies at that moment. They floated in the sky, and there was a small red bottle before each of them. 8 drops of blood flew out from the 8 bottles, and they landed at the center of each woman's brows like a red dot. At the instant they did so, the 8 women closed their eyes, and a piercing blood-red light erupted from their bodies. Under that blood-red light, their white robes looked as if they had turned blood red. As that light filled the air, it covered Evil Spirit Sect's mountain, but it did not cover the Berserker sky, so that Eastern Wasteland's bell would not be able to detect the presences of those who descended. The function of that red light was to allow Eastern Wasteland's bell to display its power based on the different levels of cultivation and limits of those who descended. It could be said that the blood-red light was like a filter. Every single time it changed, it would hide the presences of the others, revealing only one person, giving that person a chance to fight against Han Mountain Bell alone. Moreover, this blood light could change the aura of the person who revealed their cultivation, causing their aura to be 10% to 20% lower than their true cultivation. Using this method, it would be a true trial. The Eastern Wasteland Bell's divine abilities would be unleashed according to the cultivation base it sensed. It wouldn't waste the slightest bit, nor would it unleash the slightest bit less. Yet even so, Eastern Wasteland's Bell was definitely not an ordinary treasure. It was the sacred vessel of the entire Berserkers and Eastern Wastelands. It was a priceless treasure left behind by the first god of Berserkers to protect the Berserkers. It possessed the power to shatter anything with a single strike. Regardless of the level of his opponent's cultivation base, it would use the same level of power to descend upon them. However, what it revealed was a power that could destroy anyone in the cultivation realm. It was also the most powerful thing in the cultivation realm. Yet, even if Evil Sect had made such preparations, some of the Evil Sect members who descended upon the Berserkers' disaster that happened once every 50 years would still die under Eastern Wasteland's Bell. This method of indirectly controlling Eastern Wasteland's Bell and changing the Celestial Maiden's function was created by the strongest person in Evil Sect, Jian. This method might be insane and dangerous, but it could make all those in evil sect not want to waste even a single bit of time. They would train madly and fight against the immortal sects, because they could use enchanted treasures to fight against the Berserker's disaster. The blood-red screen of light that had been modified by G and spread out above the four great evil sects at that moment. Almost at the instant the blood-red screen of light was formed, the first person to go through the trial of the Berserker's disaster was the strongest person in evil spirit sect, the Grand Sect Elder Shindong. Su Ming stared at the blood-red screen of light, and his eyes sparkled. He was looking at the 8 women and the blood-red bottle before them. In silence, a complicated look appeared on his face. He remembered the bewildered celestial maiden who was in his storage bag at that moment. At that moment, a cold harumph came from the top of Evil Spirit Sex Mountain. Bao Chio's expression finally calmed down under the blood-red screen of light, as if all the pressure on her had disappeared. However, a grave expression appeared on her face, and there was even a deep sense of nervousness on her face. With a pale face, she looked towards Su Ming's back. She knew that the true trial was about to begin. The cold harumph caused the person who had spoken to become the only person whose level of cultivation was revealed under the blood-red screen of light. A powerful power erupted forth at that instant, and the ripples of power shook the sky and earth, causing Su Ming's pupils to shrink, and he lifted his head to look over. He saw the black smoke rising into the sky, turning into a gigantic shadow. That shadow seemed to be 10,000 feet tall, and it was rather indistinct, as if it would scatter if wind blew on it. However, no matter how strong the wind was, it could not blow away the shadow of the black smoke. Only those whose level of cultivation had surpassed great completion in the Berserker Soul realm, or those who had surpassed the Immortals and Ascendants, would be able to do so. That shadow seemed to be a man, but due to his indistinct appearance, his face could not be seen clearly. However, the presence spreading out from his body caused Su Ming's pupils to shrink. The feeling he got from this person's level of cultivation was similar to that of Sima Xen, who had obtained the inheritance of the second god of Berserkers and had mastered numerous divine abilities in the past. At that moment, the illusory figure shot through the blood-red screen of light and appeared in the world. Immediately, a deafening hum came from Eastern Wasteland's bell in the sky. As that hum rang out, the bell did not even cast any of its divine abilities, but simply used its gigantic body to push down on the ground. With it, the bell sank 10 feet downwards, and as it did so, a wave of ripples spread out swiftly towards the ground. The entire ground let out a loud bang, and even Evil Spirit Sex Mountain shuddered a few times. A large amount of shattered stones fell off, and cracks appeared on the ground before rapidly spreading outwards. At the same time, the gigantic, indistinct figure lifted his arms, as if he was trying to push against the sky's mighty pressure and fight against Eastern Wasteland's bell's sinking power. A low roar reverberated in the air. That roar sounded as if a person had been holding his breath for a long time before letting it out. As that roar spread out like muffled thunder, the indistinct figure seemed to be unable to withstand that pressure. With a bang, his arms exploded, as if he could no longer withstand it, and right before Su Ming's eyes, his body shattered into pieces like a broken vase as the roar reverberated in the air. However, as it shattered, Su Ming saw that there was another figure within that shattered black shadow. It was a middle-aged man with rather long hair dressed in blue robes. A ghastly glare shone in his eyes, and he started roaring towards the sky. Is this the ultimate power of those in the later stage of ascendance? You still can't destroy me. Naturally, the middle-aged man was Shundong. As he spoke, he flew up and charged towards Eastern Wasteland's bell. Su Ming's eyes sparkled, and as he looked at Evil Spirit Sect's Grand Sect Elder Shindong's figure, he thought in his heart, a power that's equivalent to great completion in the Berserker Soul realm is an immortal who has attained great completion in ascendance. But the presence he's showing isn't that of great completion in the Berserker Soul realm. It's a power that's slightly inferior to the later stage of ascendance. This should be related to the Celestial Maiden's screen of light. Su Ming narrowed his eyes. He could already tell that evil sect had used a trick to fight against the Berserker's disaster. And through this, he could also guess that the power Eastern Wasteland's bell was using should be the ultimate power of a realm. As Su Ming was immersed in his thoughts, he lifted his head, and with bright eyes, he looked at Shun Dong, getting closer to Eastern Wasteland's bell in the sky. At the instant he was about to close in, a ripple swiftly spread out from Eastern Wasteland's bell, and that ripple turned into an illusory mountain and river. At first glance, the mountain and river looked like an illusion, but soon they turned incredibly corporeal. They looked like the Milky Way and Heaven Mountain in the sky. These mountains and rivers were the things carved on the bell's body. They were originally 9 mountains, 9 rivers, and 9 deserts. At that moment, what appeared in midair was a mountain and a river. There were no deserts. At the instant the mountain and river appeared, Su Ming immediately saw an incredibly grave expression on Shindong's face. As the Milky Way descended, it looked as if it had turned into a long dragon that swept through the sky and charged toward Shindong. At the same time, the Milky Way let out a bang and appeared right above Shindong, as if it had teleported and pressed down on him. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, only the span of a few breaths had passed since the mountain and river appeared. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, the mountain and river disappeared, and Shindong coughed up a huge mouthful of blood, but he continued retreating while laughing loudly. The blood-red screen of light in Evil Spirit Sect immediately changed as the 8 celestial maidens moved, covering up Shindong's presence and revealing the ripples of power from another person. Su Ming saw the Berserker's disaster in Eastern Wastelands, and he saw all the Berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance in Evil Spirit Sect being revealed as the blood-red screen of light changed. They would either successfully go through the disaster or die. Shrill screams of pain reverberated in the air. "This is the 9th." Bao Qiu's voice came from behind Su Ming. Her face was pale as she looked at the sky outside the window. Su Ming did not speak. Grief gradually appeared on his face. He was not grieving for those who had descended to this place or those who had changed their blood inheritance. He was grieving for the persistence of Eastern Wasteland's sacred vessel, which had never changed since the beginning of time. Even if that persistence had been used by Evil Sect to turn into the Berserker's disaster to refine their sect. Su Ming watched Eastern Wasteland's bell repeatedly, trying to kill all the people who had revealed the ripples of power from the other races. It descended time and time again, wanting to use this one day that would only appear once every 50 years to complete its mission. Even if it would become increasingly difficult to complete its mission, it still persisted. Su Ming closed his eyes. Not long after he did so, a wave of cold air suddenly surrounded the tower where he was. At the same time, Bao Qiu's Berserker's disaster arrived. An incredibly mighty pressure descended swiftly and landed on the tower, right on Bao Qiu's body. Bao Qiu trembled and gritted her teeth to fight against it. Su Ming still had his eyes closed. "I'm home. I'll resume tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 690. Do I have the right to become its master? This was the thought that rose in Su Ming's heart. Eastern Wasteland's bell was the Berserker's sacred vessel. It was the treasure of the first god of Berserkers, and it was left behind to bring good fortune to his descendants and serve as a deterrent against the foreign races. Even Evil Sect's Jian, who had made Dition send 2 of his clones here, could only change the trajectory of this bell's descent slightly. He did not dare to destroy this treasure. Just showing 1 mountain and 1 river is already equivalent to the limit of a Berserker in the later stage of the Berserker Soul Realm. If it brings out all 9 mountains, 9 rivers, and 9 deserts, then just what sort of state will the ripples of power that will erupt forth reach? Su Ming opened his eyes. Bao Qiu was trembling behind him, and a conflicted look appeared on her face. She continued forming seals with her hands, but she gritted her teeth and did not beg Su Ming to attack. As the blood-red screen of light completely revealed the tower, Bao Qiu's presence, as well as her power as an outsider, was clearly revealed under Eastern Wasteland's bell. The ripples of power belonged to the immortals who were in between soul transformation and soul formation. At the instant it spread out, Eastern Wasteland's bell pressed down, and with it, the entire tower shuddered. The illusory statue of the woman before Bao Qiu immediately shattered and exploded into pieces. Bao Qiu also coughed up a mouthful of blood. Her face turned pale, and her body looked as if it was about to shatter at any moment due to the pressure. Eastern Wasteland's bell sank another 5 feet, and because of that, it was as if a heavy force had suddenly appeared on a drowning person's body, wanting to drag him deep into the water. Despair appeared in Bao Qiu's eyes. As Eastern Wasteland's bell sank down, an illusory shadow of a bell could be vaguely seen descending and charging towards Bao Qiu. At that moment, it had already closed in on the tower, and it was about to shoot through it to kill all the outsiders according to its mission. Su Ming sighed softly and turned around. At the instant the illusory bell shot through the tower and was about to descend on Bao Qiu's spirit, he took a step forward, and at the instant he did so, he appeared behind Bao Qiu. He lifted his right hand and lifted it gently in the direction of the incoming illusory bell. With it, Su Ming shuddered, but his expression remained the same. The illusory bell in his right hand no longer sank downwards, but had been forcefully blocked by him. Almost at the instant Su Ming's right hand touched the illusory bell, Eastern Wasteland's bell in the sky let out a long bell chime. At the same time, a great will instantly appeared in Su Ming's heart. That will did not speak. Instead, it was filled with a chilling and ancient air. Once it swept through Su Ming's body, it returned to Eastern Wasteland's bell in the sky. Soon after, an even stronger mighty pressure descended once again, as if it wanted to bypass Su Ming and suppress Bao Qiu to death. In the sky, a mountain materialized. That mountain was 100,000 feet tall and towered in the air. At the instant it appeared, the expressions of all the people in Evil Spirit Sect who were watching immediately changed. A glint even appeared in Grand Sect Elder Shindong's eyes. He was the only one in the entire Evil Spirit Sect who could make Eastern Wasteland's bell manifest a mountain and a river since the Berserker's disaster started. No one else had the right to make Eastern Wasteland's bell do this. Just the mighty pressure that it sent downwards was enough to punish outsiders with their lives. At that moment, the illusion of a mountain was the first to appear in Berserker's calamity after Shindong. Bao Qiu, Grand Sect Elder Shindong mumbled under his breath. Once the mountain appeared, it occupied a small part of the sky. It was a green mountain, and as an overflowing life force filled the area, it swiftly descended towards the tower that had appeared on the blood-red screen of light. Bao Qiu widened her eyes as she stood beside Su Ming. She could sense the power of the mountain in the sky, and this was something she had never expected to happen. She had never expected that a mountain would manifest while she was going through the Berserker's disaster. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He suddenly realized that his previous thoughts were wrong. Once Eastern Wasteland's bell retrieved its will from him, it had manifested this mountain, and it was not targeted at Bao Qiu, but at him. A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. Once he understood this, he looked towards the descending illusory mountain, and with just one glance, he could tell that there was no real killing intent within it. This was something that no one else would be able to see, unless they were like Su Ming and had the same analysis and judgment as him. No matter how they looked at it, this was the Berserker's disaster descending upon them. The power of a mountain devoid of killing intent. This power descended because of my appearance. Since it isn't to erase my existence, then it must be a trial. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. At the same time, the smile on his face grew brighter, and a hint of respect appeared in his eyes. Su Ming was different from the others. He was familiar with Eastern Wasteland's bell because of Han Mountain Bell. He was grieved by everything that had happened just now, and he respected it because of its persistence. Even if it was just a treasure, Su Ming still respected it. At that moment, as the power of the mountain descended, Su Ming lifted his right hand and sliced his index finger with his thumb. Immediately, a thin cut appeared and blood flowed out, dyeing his right index finger red. When he lifted his head and sensed that the power of the mountain was getting closer, and that Bao Qiu was trembling even more furiously by his side, he swiped his blood-stained index finger across Bao Qiu's fair forehead. Then, he smeared his blood on the center of Bao Qiu's brows. That blood mark was like a mark. At the instant it was wiped off, Bao Qiu was completely stunned, because she noticed that once that blood fell on her forehead, she could no longer feel a single hint of pressure. It was as if she had been placed outside, as if she had been ignored by Eastern Wasteland's Belle, and the Berserker's disaster had let her go. This scene caused Bao Qiu's heart to pound against her chest. She was in shock as she looked at Su Ming, dumbfounded. A huge storm raged in her heart, and the numerous questions she could not understand caused her breathing to quicken. It was difficult for her to understand how Su Ming could make the Berserker's disaster spare her with just one swipe at the center of her brows. She also could not understand how he had managed to do all of this. Just who was he? Just what sort of level of cultivation did he possess? Where did he come from? And just what sort of connection did he have with Eastern Wasteland's Belle? She could guess that there was definitely a huge secret hidden in this. Just what was that secret? As she hesitated, she seemed to have remembered something, and her eyes immediately went wide. She looked at Su Ming with a dumbfounded expression, and disbelief, as well as a dazed bewilderment, appeared on her face. A loud bang reverberated in the world. Right before the eyes of all those in Evil Spirit's sect who were paying attention, the mountain that had manifested in the form of a mountain shot through the two-story building and was descending on it. None of them, including Shandong, had expected that there would be another person in Bao Qiu's house. Right then, they could sense that Bao Qiu should be the one fighting against the power of the mountain. Su Ming lifted his right hand swiftly, and his long hair danced in the air. His long robes danced in the air, and his eyes were fixed on the illusory green mountain that shot through the building. It was charging towards him with a bang, as if it wanted to suppress his soul and make it shatter. Yet right at the instant the illusory green mountain closed in on him, Su Ming lifted his right hand and pushed down on it. With that one push, a muffled boom reverberated in the air. It spread out like a ripple and reverberated through the entire Evil Spirit Sect's mountain. But this sound could not be heard by the human ear. It could only be sensed by the soul, the voice of the soul. All those who heard it, even Shandong, would be dazed for varying lengths of time. That voice echoed in their heads and refused to leave even after a long time had passed. At that moment, Bao Qiu saw a scene that she would never forget for the rest of her life. Bao Qiu was looking at Su Ming with a dumbfounded expression, and gradually, respect appeared on her face. It did not matter whether it was due to the master-follower relationship between their souls or some other reason. It did not matter which race it was. The respect towards the powerful was something that would never change as the world developed. "Thank you, Master." Bao Qiu stood up lightly and wrapped her fist in her palm to bow towards Su Ming. "The recommendation votes have already disappeared. Do you have recommendation votes to support me? To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 691. Su Ming was lost in his thoughts and did not bother himself with Bao Qiu. After some time, Bao Qiu stood up and stood obediently by the side. Occasionally, she would cast her gaze on Su Ming, and a hint of surprise and complicated emotions gradually appeared on her face. She had not expected that she would meet this person here. In truth, when Su Ming smeared his blood at the center of her brows and caused her to disappear from the Berserker's disaster, the shock in her heart had made her think of a person. She had not expected that she would meet this person in such a manner, and that he would actually become her master. Time trickled by. It was quiet outside the tower, but the mighty pressure and the bell chimes remained. When the sky gradually turned dark and midnight arrived, more than 30 people had died in the Berserker's disaster in Evil Spirit Sect. Most of these 30-something people were berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance. They had turned their backs on the berserkers and betrayed their ancestors. For all sorts of reasons, they had changed their blood inheritance and started practicing evil sex arts. Eastern Wasteland's bell did not just appear in the sky above Evil Spirit Sect. It also appeared in Evil Lust Sect, Evil Dust Sect, and Evil Immortal Sect. In fact, there were some immortals who did not belong to the immortal sects in Eastern Wastelands who had descended alone in the land of berserkers on this day. At the instant they revealed themselves, Eastern Wasteland's bell would appear above them and kill them all. When midnight was about to arrive, and there were no longer any people who wanted to go through the berserkers' disaster in Evil Spirit Sect, the blood-red screen of light covered the place once again, as if it had covered the eyes of Eastern Wasteland's bell, causing it to be unable to see the ripples of power from the other races. It could only slowly disappear during the final moments of its life and wait for the next 50 years to appear again. As time passed by, a brilliant glint gradually appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He took a few steps forward and stood by the window of the tower. He looked at the night sky outside and waited for the scene that would perhaps appear after dawn. Based on a meaning behind that voice, this Eastern Wastelands tower. As Su Ming was immersed in his thoughts, midnight arrived. This morning was something that would be absolutely unforgettable to all those in Eastern Wastelands. It would forever be carved into the minds of all those in Eastern Wastelands, and they would never be able to get rid of it, because on this day, the people from the immortal sects and evil sect who had descended in Eastern Wastelands had been waiting for a long time, but nothing had happened. The reason why Evil Sect G and had spared no effort to change the rules of the Eastern Wastelands Bell's descent was because he longed for such a thing to happen. However, no one knew just what sort of conditions were needed for this to happen. This included the immortal sections. Even Tion's clone only knew that one of the conditions for this to happen was that a sufficient number of foreigners had appeared in the land of berserkers. But after all these years, more and more descenders arrived in the Eastern Wastelands, but the thing they longed for didn't happen. So, these descenders came to an agreement and started a war. They didn't hesitate to use a great deal of magic power and divine abilities, and even paid an unimaginable price, the clash between Eastern Wastelands and South Morning. Without knowing the conditions for that thing to happen, they could only try to figure it out and try all the conditions that could possibly exist so that they could complete all of them. The clash between Eastern Wastelands and South Morning might have been a coincidence, but Evil Sect and the other sects in the land of immortals had their own methods. They could find the people who stood at the top of the immortals when it came to divination and had them calculate the conditions for that event to happen. That was why the catastrophe of the Eastern Wastelands was born, because the results of the divination obtained by Evil Sect and the other immortal sects might have been different, but the meaning behind their words was similar. The collision between the two continents would cause a turning point for that thing to happen. No one knew what that turning point would be. Yet no matter what, the first Berserker's disaster that would appear after the collision was the crucial point to see whether that turning point would appear. If that thing truly happened, then it would mean that the immortals had succeeded in their divination. If that didn't happen, then they would continue to use other methods to ensure that it would happen one day. Since there was a possibility that a turning point would appear during the Berserker's disaster and cause that thing to happen, all the sects and clans in the immortal world had sent their most outstanding prodigies to the land of the Berserkers so that they would not be caught off guard, to prevent themselves from being caught off guard. All the sects and clans in the immortal world sent their most outstanding prodigies to the land of the Berserkers. For example, Bailing, Chunxin, Chunchong, Sikong, and also Eastern Wastelands evil sects Baisu and Justice Daoziwang. These prodigies descended one after another. Their trials had been waiting for this event to happen, and then they would begin. In fact, they had even been sent out to search for the place where the second god of Berserkers' torn limbs were sealed in South Morning and Eastern Wastelands, because their sects believed that one of the conditions for that thing to happen was related to the second god of Berserkers. This was something that the immortals who descended in Eastern Wastelands desired greatly. It was also something that they had been preparing for many years and had tried time and time again, but they had never succeeded. This matter was related to the first god of berserkers. As the land of the berserkers was continuously occupied by the immortals who descended in the land of the berserkers, and as the immortals' reverence and mystery towards the berserkers were slowly revealed, and as they continued to understand and dig deeper, the immortals gradually learned of a secret. There was a tower in Eastern Wastelands. That tower's name was Eastern Wastelands Tower, and it had 99 levels. If anyone could step into the final level, then they would obtain the first god of berserkers' epiphany towards world plane realm and plane culpa. The epiphany towards world plane realm might not be able to attract the attention of the limited number of powerful immortals, but plane culpa was different. This was the source of their dreams. If they could understand it, then it would be of great importance to them when they reached a breakthrough in their levels of cultivation. The first god of berserkers' supreme treasure was also left in that place, along with his divine abilities and arts. All of this stirred the immortals' hearts, and once they became certain of this, they longed for Eastern Wastelands Tower. More importantly, based on the clues the immortals obtained, they believed that there was a heinous secret hidden in the final level of Eastern Wastelands Tower. This secret was related to Great U Baron Cauldron. It was a clue leading to the strongest supreme treasure in the land of berserkers. This treasure was also connected to an order that had spread through the entire sacred Morning Dao world from Morning Dao Planet countless years ago. All cultivators in sacred Morning Dao world are to search for the Dao Origin Cauldron, also known as Great U Baron Cauldron. The person who finds this cauldron will obtain my legacy and be crowned as the heir of sacred Morning Dao world. Su Ming did not know any of this, but did not stop him from standing by the window of the tower and looking at the night sky, waiting for the scene the voice spoke of to appear. At that moment, he was not the only one doing this. Evil Spirit Sect's Grand Sect Elder Shindong, who was one of the people who knew these secrets, also cast his gaze towards the sky and waited. I hope I can succeed this time. There's something strange about the land of berserkers. Those old monsters with great power can't descend with their true bodies, and Sir Ji and also needs a clone to manage the situation here. Perhaps I will get a chance to make a great contribution. It was the same for Evil Dust Sect and Evil Lust Sect. The Grand Sect elders of these two sects and the immortals who descended to this place who knew these secrets were all looking at the sky nervously. Evil Sect was not the only one acting this way. D. Tion's projection stood quietly in his courtyard within Great Leaf Immortal Sect and looked at the sky. His expression was aloof, but there was a brilliant light in his eyes. Hidden Dragon Sect and Sky Mist Dao also had sects in Eastern Wastelands, and all of them looked at the sky in anxiety and anticipation. They had already given up far too much to make Eastern Wastelands Tower appear. Tian Lan Meng and Tian Lan Yu had different expressions on their faces at that moment. They stood beside Sky Mist's ancestor and looked at the night quietly. Tian Lan Yu's expression was as cold as ice that would never melt. As for Tian Lan Meng, there was a complicated look on her face. Her expression was gloomy, as if there were many things weighing on her mind. In the sky, when dawn passed, the expressions of all the people who were looking at the sky in different parts of the Eastern Wastelands suddenly changed. The long crack that had appeared in the sky did not close up and disappear like it did 50 years ago. Instead, rays of powerful light that caused the entire night to brighten up spread out from within. In an instant, the entire sky of the East Wasteland was illuminated by this light. Loud booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the crack in the sky was torn open. When it expanded outwards once again, a gigantic object swiftly descended from the crack. Its appearance was like a gigantic stone that caused the crack to be unable to withstand its weight. As it tore apart, it crumbled and turned into a gigantic hole that was several hundreds of thousands of feet wide. As the hole appeared, the gigantic object descended completely. It was an octagonal object, and it was the base of a gigantic tower. A huge boom rang out, and the entire land quaked as the gigantic pagoda smashed down onto the ground. Beneath it had been a mountain, but that mountain was so weak that it couldn't stand up to a single blow. Instantly, it shattered into pieces, allowing the pagoda to rise up into the air. Its height was endless. What was revealed between the ground and the hole in the sky was just a part of it. The other half was within the hole in the sky. This was a gigantic tower that could shock all those who saw it. Eastern Wasteland's tower has appeared. From this moment onwards, there are 26 spots left. The time limit is 1,000 days. 1,000 days later, we will offer sacrifices in all directions, and the blood-red light from Eastern Wasteland's tower will reach 10 million lease. The 26 people who offer up the most immortal souls will obtain the right to enter the tower. If the light from the blood offered to Eastern Wasteland's tower does not reach 10 million lease, the tower will not be opened. I, Lai Shan Xiao, have my priceless treasure in this tower along with my various divine abilities, arts, and medicinal cores. You can practice both immortals and berserkers at the same time. I have gained my epiphany regarding world planes, and I have also gained my epiphany when I condensed all 10,000 worlds into one plane Kulpa. There is also the path I have practiced for half of my life. This tower also contains the greatest treasure of the berserkers, the one I snatched from Morning Tao, the clue to Great You Baron Cauldron. With this clue, I swear on my life that you will be able to find the Great Baron Cauldron. Su Ming's heart trembled. He looked at the sky, and a unique voice reached his ears. There was a hint of pride in that voice, along with a hint of unruliness. What a ruthless god of berserkers, Lai Shan Xiao. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. Do you have more recommendation votes? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 692. The first god of berserkers was indeed ruthless. The appearance of Eastern Wasteland's tower was 99 stories tall, and the supreme treasure at the top was enough to make the immortals and berserkers' hearts pound in excitement. The 26 spots could stir up a storm of blood, and to prevent a situation that could not be controlled from happening, such as the 26 people coming up with their own rankings after colluding with each other in secret, they also added a limit of 10 million lease. Because of that, it would no longer be as simple as a storm of blood, but a sea of blood. If there was not enough immortals to kill, then they would not be able to step into Eastern Wasteland's tower. If they did not have the right to enter, then they would not be able to obtain a great serendipity. That was why when the first god of berserkers' words echoed in the air, Su Ming could sense Lai Shan Xiao's ruthlessness. Similarly, all the immortals who heard his words felt a deep chill run down their spines while they longed for the supreme treasure. It was not as if no one had suspected whether Eastern Wasteland's tower truly contained those supreme treasures, as Lai Shan Xiao had said. But most of the almighties who were skilled in divination found by the immortal sects who descended here had divined that this was true. Besides, with the first god of berserker's status and level of cultivation, once he said this, then there would definitely be no falsehood. This was something that the immortals had to acknowledge, even if they hated Lai Shan Xiao. Su Ming averted his gaze away from the night sky and closed his eyes. The first god of berserkers' Eastern Wasteland's tower is not a conspiracy, but an open one. Tion's clone and evil sect G and can clearly tell that this is a situation where the immortals will fight against each other. They need a sufficient amount of immortal souls. In fact, if there are any berserkers who want to obtain the right, they will naturally have to fight for it with all their might. It would have been fine if they were alone, but there are plenty of tribes in the land of berserkers, and there are also some sects like Freezing Sky Clan. These sects are even more fanatical about the items left behind by the first god of berserkers. What an open scheme. Not only did it make the immortals fight against each other, it also made the berserkers rise to power and slaughter the immortals in a frenzy so that they could obtain the chance to obtain that great serendipity. In fact, there are even signs of them forming an alliance. Within these 1,000 days, the entire Eastern Wastelands will be plunged into a bloody storm. Su Ming opened his eyes, and a brilliant light shone in them. Chaos is about to arrive. Su Ming swung his arm and took a few steps back before sitting down cross-legged on the ground once again. He had a sense of danger, and he needed to recover his power as soon as possible so that he could obtain his place in the chaotic eastern wastelands. 26 spots. It should be 27. However, the others don't know about my spot. Bao Qiu calmed down at that moment, and when she looked at Su Ming, there was respect in her eyes, along with a hint of something else. Don't worry, young master. Bao Qiu will definitely not speak to anyone about what happened today. If there's nothing else, Bao Qiu will take her leave. I believe that the other fellow disciples in the sect will come one after another to investigate the reason for the mountain's descent. Bao Qiu bowed slightly towards Su Ming, then lowered her beautiful head and retreated, intending to leave the second floor of the tower and return to the first floor. Right at the instant Bao Qiu was about to leave, Su Ming's gaze fell on the woman. As he looked at that beautiful face and that body that could make a person's heart pound, Su Ming's expression was as calm as still water. My blood can help you avoid the berserker's disaster. What do you think of this? Bao Qiu's retreating footsteps came to an abrupt halt, and a light shudder ran through her body. She lifted her head and looked at Su Ming. There was a hint of pity on her face, a hint of bewilderment, a hint of sentimentality, and all sorts of other expressions, causing her face to look incredibly complicated. It's nothing. Bao Qiu lowered her head, as if she did not dare look into Su Ming's eyes. Su Ming looked at Bao Qiu and suddenly asked, "Have you met Destiny before?" When she heard the word destiny, Bao Qiu shuddered once again, and she instinctively took a few steps back. Her face immediately turned pale. I've never met him, but I've heard of him. Young master, don't force me. All those who descend to the land of berserkers have to swear an oath in their hearts before they come to the land of berserkers. Once they speak of it, they will be punished, and they will also drag down their families in the land of immortals. Bao Qiu lifted her head and looked at Su Ming with a pleading look in her eyes. Su Ming remained silent for a moment, and fatigue appeared on his face. He closed his eyes and no longer pressed her for more information. Even if he knew, what could he do? Even if he verified his guess, what could he do? He was still in Death region, and he still did not know where his memories were, and he still did not know where the girl who called him Big Brother was. In the end, I still have to break all of this myself. One of these days, I will break this sky and walk out. That day is not too far away. At the instant Su Ming closed his eyes, he whispered to himself. Bao Qiu left. After the berserker's disaster, Evil Spirit Sect seemed to have returned to how it was before. There were quite a number of people from the sect who came to visit Bao Qiu and ask her about descending into the mountain. These people did not notice Su Ming's existence. Even Grand Sect Elder Shindong would find it difficult to notice him within a short period of time if Su Ming wanted to avoid him. The immortal sects in Eastern Wastelands also seemed to be in a state of peace after the berserker's disaster. It was as if nothing had happened besides the gigantic hole in the sky and the flattened mountain range that had appeared at the center of Eastern Wastelands, along with the towering Eastern Wastelands Tower, whose end could not be seen. Perhaps there were also people who went to investigate the tower in secret, but Su Ming did not know what the results were. However, a month after the berserker's disaster, he noticed some slight changes in the entire Evil Spirit Sect. Quite a number of people who had isolated themselves for a long period of time came out. Occasionally, powerful ripples of power would appear on the mountain. The disciples from the outer sect no longer ventured out. Every single day, quite a number of disciples who had gone out to train previously would rush back to the sect, as if they had received a summons. A gigantic mountain protection rune gradually enveloped the area around Evil Spirit Sect's mountain. At the same time it locked down the entire place, a large amount of the power of the world was absorbed into the mountain, causing the entire mountain to look like it was surrounded by clouds and fog from the distance. In fact, some of the disciples from the outer sect who had been chased down the mountain due to punishment were summoned back by the outer sect. They returned to the outer sect and started making preparations in secret. A tense atmosphere surrounded the entire evil spirit sect. Su Ming was not unfamiliar with this atmosphere. It was preparing for war. Bao Qiu would send medicinal cores to him every single day, and the quality of those medicinal cores was getting better. Based on the few words she said after she arrived, Su Ming knew clearly that his senses were not wrong. They were indeed preparing for war. All of this was due to an order from evil immortal sect on the third day after the Berserkers' disaster. There was a bloodthirsty air within that order, and there were only two sentences in it. Prepare for war. Gather and wait to go. During the month, due to the existence of those medicinal cores, Su Ming's training speed increased. Based on his estimations, if he could continue like this, then in another month he would be able to recover to 9/10 of his original state. Half a year later, he would be able to make a complete recovery and reach a peak that he had never reached before. At that time, he would be able to reach Berserker Soul Realm, and once he succeeded, he would be able to ignore all those who had attained great completion in the Berserker Soul Realm. This was his confidence. Half a year is a little long. It wouldn't be a big deal if it was a normal day, but now that Eastern Wastelands Tower has a limit of 1,000 days, I need to reach Berserker Soul Realm as soon as possible. Looks like I'll have to go out and experiment with the secret art in Hong Luo's legacy. Fortunately, I've recovered quite a bit of my cultivation base now, and can somewhat execute it. There might be some drawbacks, but I still have to do this. Eastern Wastelands Tower will not be activated without the blood-red light shining within 10 million lis, but based on what the first god of Berserkers said, it seems like this is a restriction for the 26 people who have obtained the right to enter. It didn't mention me. If I have the chance, I should go and take a look and see whether there's such a restriction for me as well. If there isn't, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he continued immersing himself in his training. In the blink of an eye, another half a month went by. When noon arrived, Su Ming's eyes flew open, and a brilliant light shone in them. He lifted his head, and his gaze seemed to be able to see through the tower and see the sky outside. Right before his eyes, 3 long arcs charged towards him from beyond Evil Spirit Sect's mountain protection rune. These 3 long arcs lined up side by side, and they looked like shooting stars surrounded by black fog. As piercing whistles reverberated in the air, the 3 long arcs closed in on the mountain protection rune. With a flash of black light, they shot through the rune and appeared within Evil Spirit Sect. Their appearance immediately caught all the people's attention, and their gazes gathered on the 3 people. By Sir Jian's orders, Evil Spirit Sect's Shendong will come forward and listen to his orders. Almost at the same time these words were spoken, a ghastly voice came from the black smoke that rose into the sky from Evil Spirit Sect. I am Shendong. Greetings, evil messengers. The 3 people immediately wrapped their fists in their palms and bowed towards the spot where Shendong's voice came from. The person in the lead brought out a jade slip and crushed it. Immediately, the air before him distorted, and an illusory figure appeared. That figure's face could not be seen clearly. The only people who could see it were black robes that covered its head and face. A chilling presence immediately spread out from its body and enveloped the entire Evil Spirit Sect, causing all the people who saw it to feel their hearts tremble. They lowered their heads and knelt down to worship it. When that chilling presence spread out, the sky immediately darkened, as if it was covered by a layer of fog, causing all those who saw it to be unable to see clearly. Shendong. A low voice came from the figure's body. There was not a hint of emotion in that voice, causing all those who heard it to feel a chill fill their entire bodies. Bring your Evil Spirit Sect to Thousand River Valley. Your target is one of Hidden Dragon Sect's branches. You have 10 days, and your goal is to completely destroy them. Build a defense line there and turn it into one of the bases for Evil Sect to invade the Immortal Sects. At that moment, a person walked out from the black smoke. He was middle-aged and dressed in blue robes. He wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed respectfully towards the figure. Understood. The figure did not speak again. Instead, he gradually disappeared. The 3 evil messengers wrapped their fists in their palms towards Shendong in silence, and two of them turned into long arcs that shot through the mountain protection rune and charged into the distance. The last person wrapped his fist in his palm and stayed where he was, not saying a single word. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 693. Inner Sect and Outer Sect Evil Spirit Disciples, Sect Elders at dawn today, mobilize a fifth of Evil Spirit Sect's forces and follow me. To Hidden Dragon Sect. Shun Dong swept his gaze across the land, and his gaze paused for a moment on the two-story building where Su Ming was meditating. Then he spoke languidly. His words reverberated through the entire Evil Spirit Sect, causing all those who heard it to feel their blood boil uncontrollably, and a murderous aura swiftly erupted within them. Same rules. Those who kill them will have a seventh of everything they obtain, and it will be the same for those who kill them, who snatch their things. Shandong's voice echoed outside the tower. When he had cast a glance towards the tower, just now, his gaze had seemed to have met Su Ming's, causing his pupils to shrink. Shandong then averted his gaze. Shandong. Su Ming narrowed his eyes. He had underestimated this person a little. Perhaps he had not truly discovered him with that glance, but he had definitely seen some clues. However, this person had been able to bear with it until now. Even though he had his suspicions, he had not done anything too extreme or tried to investigate Su Ming. Even his gaze just now had only swept past Su Ming, and there was no hint of hostility in it. Su Ming had never come into contact with Evil Spirit Sect's Grand Sect Elder, but based on this, he could tell that this person was a man of great cunning and was definitely not someone to be trifled with. If he can become someone who stands at the peak of a sect and has even reached the level of ascendance in the land of immortals, then he should indeed possess this sort of cunning mind. Su Ming closed his eyes and continued immersing himself in his training. With his current level of cultivation, he could already fight against Shandong without falling into a disadvantageous position. That was why he was not bothered by the fact that this person had seen some clues. If push came to shove, he could leave Evil Spirit Sect and search for a place to isolate himself, even if it would be a little troublesome. As for Shandong reporting this matter to the people in Evil Immortal Sect, or to Ji-in, the strongest in Evil Sect, Su Ming was also on guard against this. Forget about the possibility of Shandong reporting this matter to the people in Evil Immortal Sect before he could investigate this matter thoroughly. Even if it did happen, Su Ming believed that with his level of cultivation, it would not be easy for Ji-in to kill him. It was especially so during this critical moment when Eastern Wasteland's tower appeared. The enemy of my enemy can become my ally. Su Ming's expression was calm as he continued training. The entire Evil Spirit Sect started making a series of adjustments once Shandong spoke. Orders were sent out from the Inner Sect, and all the Inner Sect disciples who received them walked out of their houses to gather at the designated spot at the designated time. It was the same for the Outer Sect. After all, most of the berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance were in the Outer Sect. As they gathered together, quite a number of them received orders. In fact, when Su Ming returned at night, Bao Qiu handed him a jade slip. Qian Shun, a servant at the bottom of the mountain, sent this jade slip to you. This is the summoning order of the Outer Sect. Congratulations, you can be summoned back to the Outer Sect, Bao Qiu said with a smile. Su Ming opened his eyes and placed the jade slip by his side. Looks like I can go out with you this time. I've also received an order. Tonight, at dawn, I'll enter Thousand River Valley and destroy the Hidden Dragon Sect's branch in the east of the Eastern Barrenlands. The other evil sects must have also received orders to completely destroy all the immortal sects in the east of the Eastern Barrenlands. As Bao Qiu spoke, she sat down across from Su Ming and twirled a few strands of her hair as she spoke softly. Most of the Outer Sect disciples have low levels of cultivation. What use will they be in destroying Hidden Dragon Sect's branch? Su Ming frowned. They could be used as a blood sacrifice. You're clearly being treated as a blood sacrifice, Bao Qiu said with a smile and a wink. Bao Qiu blinked, then said with a smile, She found it very interesting that someone from the outer sect would actually think of using a powerful warrior like Su Ming as a blood sacrifice. But this is also a good thing. If you have time, you can go there. Hidden Dragon Sect is skilled in the art of creating medicinal cores, and they're famous among the immortals. Besides, when evil sect attacks, a seventh of what we get belongs to us. I don't have many medicinal cores left, and the ones I got over the past few days were given to us to prepare for war. With your level of cultivation, you should be able to sweep through Hidden Dragon Sect's branch without anyone noticing. At that time, don't forget to share some with me on account of how much I've served you over the past few days. Bao Qiu blinked, and her smile was incredibly sweet. Anticipation shone in her eyes, along with a hint of excitement. Besides, I can lead the way. I visited Hidden Dragon Sect's branch before. As Bao Qiu spoke, she licked her lips. She was beautiful to begin with, and when she did that, she looked even more alluring. Su Ming fell into a moment of pensive silence before he nodded. There were many benefits to him in obtaining medicinal cores. More importantly, there might be some medicinal herbs within the branch of Hidden Dragon Sect. If he could accumulate more medicinal herbs, then Su Ming would be able to save himself a lot of trouble in searching for medicinal herbs when he opened the dimension in the fragment in the future. However, this was not the main point. The main point was that Su Ming had already recovered around 8/10 of his cultivation base, and he was almost at 9/10 of it. At that moment, he had already surpassed the peak of his cultivation base in the past, and he could even cast a secret art he had inherited from Hong Luo, albeit with difficulty. Extract earthen aura and gather it together to form a soul. However, what he wanted to extract was not earthen aura, but spirit veins. He wanted to gather a thick amount of power from the world, and once he devoured it, his cultivation base would recover, and he would instantly advance by leaps and bounds. Since Evil Spirit Sect was his temporary shelter, it was not convenient for him to do this in this place. However, since Hidden Dragon Sect had chosen to build their branch, then there would definitely be spirit veins around. There might not be a lot of them, but if Su Ming absorbed them in this manner, then it would still be incredibly beneficial to him. However, there was also a drawback to this. This sort of forceful devouring would turn into a hidden problem since he did not have time to slowly absorb them. He would need to isolate himself in the future to make up for these problems. In truth, even if Evil Spirit Sect had not destroyed Hidden Dragon Sect's branch, Su Ming had already thought about going out for a while so that he would not need half a year to reach the peak of his cultivation base. Instead, he could try to reach the Berserker Soul realm as soon as he could. To him, this was the most important thing at the moment. Dawn was about to arrive, and the entire Evil Spirit Sect was silent. There were 30-something Evil Sect disciples waiting quietly on the field in the inner sect. These people were all Evil Spirit Sect's disciples who had been given priority in training, and Shanhen was among them. A ghastly, freezing air surrounded the inner sect's field. The sky was dark, and there was no moon that night. There was also a gigantic field in the outer sect, and at that moment, there were 200-something people packed densely on it. These people were of all different shapes and sizes. Some of them were waiting quietly. Some of them had pale faces filled with fear, and some of them had killing intent burning on their faces. All sorts of emotions could be seen on different people. Su Ming stood in a corner. He still looked like a 13 or 14-year-old boy at that moment. His face was incredibly pale, and he gave off a frail feeling. He was not alone. By his side was Qian Chun, who had just rushed back from the crowd. Qian Chun was trembling, and as he looked at Su Ming, an ingratiating look appeared on his face. "Senior, you have to help me this time. I don't want to die there." Qian Chun had already said a lot of similar words and a lot of flattering words just now. He himself did not expect that he would also receive an order to join the battle. In his fear, he placed his hopes on Su Ming and even instinctively activated the power he had accumulated as a laborer over the years. He managed to obtain a lot of promises and protection from the outer sect. However, he was still worried and returned to Su Ming to start begging him once again. Su Ming did not speak. He closed his eyes as if he was taking a nap. before long, as Qian-shun continued begging, dawn arrived. At that moment, the area instantly fell silent, and the black smoke at the top of Evil Spirit Mountain disappeared without a trace, which was a rare sight. At the same time, 9 people flew out from the top of the mountain, and the person in the lead was Evil Spirit Sect's Grand Sect Elder, Shundong. Bao Qiu was also among the 9. Su Ming opened his eyes and looked at the sky calmly. Shundong swept his gaze across the land, and when he averted his gaze, he only said one sentence. Destroy Evil Sect, leave no one alive. There were quite a number of people from the inner sect and outer sect who shouted at the same time. Their voices echoed in the quiet night with a shocking volume that shook the sky and earth. Their voices were filled with killing intent, and there was even a hint of madness within them. This was Evil Sect. Shundong took a step forward and charged towards the west. The 8 people behind him followed closely behind him, and soon after, 30-something long arcs flew up from the field in Evil Spirit Sect's inner sect and charged towards the west behind the 8 people. Soon after, 8 old men who had been silent all this while at the edge of the field in the outer sect lifted their arms. With one swing, booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the entire field in the outer sect started trembling like a gigantic plate. With a swift movement, the hundreds of people on it slowly rose into the sky, and with a swift movement, they charged behind the 30-something people from the inner sect. Violent gusts of wind tore through the air and blew against their bodies, causing some of the hundreds of people on the flying enchanted vessel that looked like a field to immediately fall to the ground. They held onto the ground tightly, as if they would be blown out of the enchanted vessel if they did not. Fortunately, this feeling only lasted for an instant. After a moment, a gentle screen of light appeared around them, and the violent gusts of wind gradually disappeared. Only then did the people let out a huge sigh of relief. Their faces turned pale, and some of the people with incredibly low levels of cultivation even nearly vomited. Qian-shun was one of them. His body was trembling, and his face was pale as he mumbled to himself. Su Ming would originally not have listened to him, but Qian-shun was right beside him, and he could not help but hear some of his words. All the gods, my brothers, sisters, uncles, my parents, please bless me that I won't have to face a bloody disaster this time. Please bless me that I will be able to pick up a treasure this time. Please bless me that I will be able to get a girl this time. Please bless me that I will be able to... Su Ming closed his eyes and ignored Qian-shun's mumbling all the way to the field. About an hour later, a gigantic valley appeared before them. There were rivers at the bottom of the valley, and the sounds of flowing water could be heard faintly. There were hundreds of those rivers, and they were not connected to each other. They were all flowing at the same time. This was Thousand River Valley. Su Ming opened his eyes. His expression was calm, but there was a freezing glare in his eyes. He saw a hanging bridge by the sides of Thousand River Valley. There were a lot of exquisite buildings on both sides of the hanging bridge and on the mountain of the valley. In the dark night, there were also lights shining brightly. The sky was dark, and there was no moon. It was the perfect night to kill, plunder, and set fires. To be continued. If you like this work, please come at Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 694. The area was filled with silence. Only the hundreds of people from Evil Spirit Sect were floating in midair and looking at Thousand River Valley in the distance. Compared to most of the outer sect disciples who were pale and trembling slightly, the inner sect disciples had aloof expressions on their faces. Their untamed air was clear, along with a hint of excitement and bloodlust. They were from Evil Spirit Sect and disciples of Evil Sect. This was something that was incredibly clear to these inner sect disciples at that moment. There was also a layer of fog that enveloped the area around these people from Evil Spirit Sect. Su Ming stood in the crowd with an indifferent look on his face as he swept his gaze across the fog around him. That fog could hide the figures of those from Evil Spirit Sect, and if anyone looked from the outside, they would find that the fog had fused together with the darkness of the night. They would not be able to see anything clearly, and unless they had a divine sense that surpassed Shandong's, it would be difficult for them to see anything. In Su Ming's eyes, he saw that the fog was formed by vengeful souls. These vengeful souls let out soundless, forlorn screams, and as they echoed in the air, they created this strange fog. The immortals all claim to be righteous and call us evil. Since you ran into us, then you will die. Today, you can kill to your heart's content. Evil Spirit Sect's Grand Sect Elder Shandong's voice was icy cold, and there was a chilling tone to it. First, we will conduct a blood sacrifice. The rest will seal off the 8 gates of rest, so that those from Hidden Dragon Sect won't be able to escape. Almost at the instant Evil Spirit Sect's Grand Sect Elder Shandong spoke, the 30-something Inner Sect disciples immediately turned their gazes toward the 200-something Outer Sect disciples on the flying enchanted vessel. A grim wave of killing intent immediately rose in them, and besides the dozens of aloof gray-robed people standing at the edge, all the other 200-something Outer Sect disciples had their expressions change. The clothes of these gray-robed people clearly revealed their status. They were the outstanding ones among the berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance, and they were Outer Sect elders who were equivalent to Zhao Chong. The Inner Sect disciples would not easily provoke them due to the blood sacrifice. As for the other Outer Sect disciples, not all of them were afraid. There were several dozens of people among them who were either laughing ferociously, looking sullen, or apathetic. The ripples of their cultivation bases erupted from their bodies. Those ripples reverberated in the air, but they were hidden by the fog around them, causing them to not spread outwards. However, there were even more people from the other sects who were already trembling when they heard the words blood sacrifice. Su Ming had heard Bao Qiu mention blood sacrifice before. This was a divine ability used in battle in Evil Spirit Sect. Before they fought against their enemies, they would devour their companions' flesh and blood as a sacrifice. They could gain strength for a short period of time, and since the vengeful souls of those who were sacrificed would be trapped, they would lose their sense of pain and be able to bring out a great deal of their potential. The more people who offered sacrifices, the greater the potential. The higher the cultivation of the people offering sacrifices, the greater the potential. If one cultivated this blood sacrifice to a certain extent, one could even devour all the living creatures around them in battle to maintain or strengthen one's own state. However, there were also drawbacks. After all cultivation techniques had their limits. The limit of the blood sacrifice was at most to raise one's cultivation realm, and it wouldn't last for long. Almost at the instant Shandong said the words, blood sacrifice, the Inner Sect disciples looked over with hostile gazes. At the instant most of the Outer Sect disciples panicked, they saw the 30 or so Inner Sect disciples suddenly charge towards the flying enchanted vessel. Shrill screams of pain that were hidden in the fog and could not travel outwards echoed in Su Ming's ears. Qian Shun was so terrified that all blood had drained from his face. Perhaps it was because the power he used as a laborer had gained some results, but most of the Inner Sect disciples ignored him. It was not that no one chose to escape, but the screen of light on the flying enchanted vessel had turned into a ravine that prevented the Outer Sect disciples from escaping, turning this place into a prison. Su Ming stood there, and a crease gradually appeared between his brows. He saw the Outer Sect disciples dying shrill deaths at the hands of their fellow sect members. Their flesh and blood were torn apart, and they turned into vengeful souls that were sucked away by the Inner Sect disciples. In fact, the shattered flesh and blood did not disappear, but instead surrounded the Inner Sect disciples' bodies, turning into a piercing, bloody, and dazzling blood-red light. All the Inner Sect disciples who killed their fellow sect members from the Outer Sect would have their faces contorted and their eyes bloodshot once they finished killing their fellow sect members. All of them looked to be slightly stronger than before, and their murderous auras surged into the sky. Similarly, among the people from the Outer Sect, only the gray-robed elders had calm expressions and didn't pay much attention to it, as if they were already used to it. The eyes of the outstanding people from the Outer Sect flashed as they charged out, and began fighting with the inner sect disciples. In a short period of time, there were 2 or 3 inner sect disciples who died horribly and became the targets of blood sacrifice. As he watched this, Su Ming remembered the rules of evil spirit sect, the rule that forbade disciples from killing each other, and at that moment, he gained a deeper understanding towards this rule. So this is evil sect, Su Ming thought quietly. It was especially so when Su Ming's gaze fell on Thousand River Valley in the distance, and he suddenly felt that it was rather ironic. This habit of evil spirit sect before they fought had caused a lot of them to die before they could even reach Hidden Dragon Sect's branch. But at the same time, the deaths of the weak were exchanged for the strength of the strong. It was especially so since there were 8 people among the 30-something inner sect disciples who did not stop after killing one outer sect disciple. Instead, they continued killing until the inner sect disciple who was the closest to Su Ming died. That person looked incredibly frail and tall, but his power was not weak, and his bloodlust could be clearly seen on him. By then, there were already 3 outer sect disciples who had died in his hands. He held a human head in his hands, and as he lifted it high into the air, blood spilled on his face, causing him to look hideous without even needing to intentionally disguise his face. He swept his gaze across the area and landed on Su Ming. With a dark smile, that person took a huge step forward and charged toward Su Ming. Killing intent shone in his eyes, and when he saw that he was getting closer to Su Ming remained calm as he looked at the person who was coming towards him with the head in his hands. Since this person was asking for death, then he could not blame Su Ming for being ruthless. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. At the instant that inner sect disciple closed in on Su Ming, Shindong's aloof voice suddenly came from all around him. The blood sacrifice has ended. Those who succeed in the blood sacrifice will follow me into Hidden Dragon Sect. As Shindong's words echoed in the air, the inner sect disciple who was closing in on Su Ming came to an abrupt halt and smiled darkly at Su Ming. Then, he turned around and no longer bothered with him, charging towards Shindong. The 30-something inner sect disciples and a few outer sect and inner sect disciples who had performed the blood sacrifice flew out and turned into long arcs. Under Shindong's lead, the 8 powerful warriors from Evil Spirit Sect who had descended in this place formed a group of 40-something long arcs that charged towards Thousand River Valley. A bloody storm was about to begin. At the same time, the gray-robed people on the flying enchanted vessel took a step forward with aloof expressions on their faces. As they formed seals with their hands, they started forming seals on the flying enchanted vessel. Immediately, the flying enchanted vessel that was the size of a field rose into the air and charged towards Thousand River Valley. It floated in the sky above Hidden Dragon Sect's branch, and a piercing dark light abruptly erupted from it. That dark light erupted from the flying enchanted vessel and immediately enveloped several hundreds of leaves beneath it, causing the place to look as if it had been sealed, turning it into a land of death. Soon after, 7 of the gray-robed people stayed behind and sat down cross-legged on the enchanted vessel. The others stepped out of the enchanted vessel and charged towards Hidden Dragon Sect underneath. At that moment, all the people in the area, including Qin Shun, only noticed after some time had passed that Su Ming, who had originally been standing beside him, had disappeared without a trace. At that moment, a shocking boom reverberated in the air. That sound came from the ground, from the rune of Hidden Dragon Sect's branch in Thousand River Valley. This rune would usually not be revealed, but at that moment, it manifested in the form of a gigantic waterfall. That waterfall was in the shape of a ring and enveloped Thousand River Valley within it. The sounds of gushing water spread through the area, and an enraged voice came from within Thousand River Valley, which was located within the waterfall. Shindong, how dare you disobey the rules of the immortals and evil immortals? You surrounded Hidden Dragon Sect today, but in the future, Hidden Dragon Sect will definitely slaughter all of your evil spirit sect. The answer to that enraged voice was a sinister cackle. Shindong also lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the waterfall. Immediately, a gigantic phantom claw stretched out from air beyond the waterfall, grabbed the waterfall, and yanked it upwards. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth, and the water from the waterfall was lifted up by the phantom claw. It tumbled backwards into the sky, causing the waterfall to tremble, and a gigantic gap appeared in the never-ending stream of water. This isn't the first sect I've destroyed, and it won't be the last either. Kill your way in and leave nothing behind. Take the souls of those you see, and take the cores of those you see. If you see a nascent soul, devour it. Make sure that there is no longer a single trace of life left in this place. As Shundong's ghastly voice reverberated in the air, he stepped through the gap in the waterfall. All the evil spirit sect members behind him, including Bao Qiu, charged through the gap and entered Hidden Dragon Sect's branch. When Bao Qiu stepped through the gap, she lifted her head and cast a glance at the flying enchanted vessel above her. She did not know when Su Ming would attack, but if he did not attack now, it would clearly be too late. Su Ming was on the suspension bridge in Thousand River Valley at that moment. With a calm expression on his face, he walked forward. His footsteps were not quick, but his body was like a ghost, causing no one to be able to see him clearly. One breath ago, he was still on the suspension bridge, but in the next breath, he was already outside the hall to the left of the valley. It was also at this moment that loud, booming sounds came from all around them, and a gigantic gap was torn open in the air before them. Shundong walked out, and behind him, all the evil spirit sect members appeared with a loud whistle. The slaughter began just like that. As enraged roars echoed in the air, several dozens of long arcs flew out from Hidden Dragon Sect and charged towards the evil spirit sect members in the sky. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, and blood rained down on the ground. The first chapter, to be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 695. Compared to the invading evil spirit sect, Hidden Dragon Sect was clearly much weaker, and the madness and bloodthirstiness of evil spirit sect could not be seen on them. The bloodshot eyes of the evil spirit sect disciples who were surrounded by flesh and blood brought a great amount of shock to the people from Hidden Dragon Sect as they roared. Shundong was also incredibly strong. As he moved forward, all those who tried to block his path would have their bodies torn apart with just one swipe of his claw. He would then grab the fleeing, nascent souls, and right under the shocked gazes of the people around him, he would swallow them whole, crush them, and swallow them. The shock brought to Hidden Dragon Sect by this scene had almost reached the point where they were about to break down. Phantom Hand Shundong. Su Ming stood outside the hall to the left of the suspension bridge. Once he lifted his head and cast a glance at the sky, he walked forward at a moderate pace. It was as if no one around him had noticed his appearance, and they simply let him walk into the hall. There were several gigantic statues worshipped in the hall, and they were all made of spirit stones. At that moment, there were 7 old men meditating with dark expressions on their faces. Their hands were connected to each other, and at the center of them was an oil lamp. That lamp was currently extinguished, but as the 7 people spread their cultivation bases out, it started showing faint signs of being lit up. Compared to the booming sounds and screams of pain outside, this place was incredibly quiet. 7 people who are equivalent to those in the middle stage of the Berserker soul realm. Su Ming's expression remained calm. When he walked into the hall, the 7 old men had their eyes closed and did not notice him. Su Ming did not believe it and walked over to stand beside the 3 statues in the hall. As he looked at them, a glint shone in his eyes. This is a bit of a waste. As he shook his head, he swung his arm, and the 3 statues immediately disappeared from the hall without a single sound. Just as Su Ming was about to leave, he turned his head sideways and cast a glance at the oil lamp surrounded by the 7 people, along with the cushions they were sitting on. Those cushions were woven from herbs, and there was a faint fragrance spreading out from them. Spirit smoke grass. Hidden Dragon Sect is indeed rich. Su Ming sighed with emotion. He knew this herb, and each one of them could be sold for nearly 100 lower-grade spirit stones. The number of herbs needed to make one cushion was about 100, which meant that one cushion was equivalent to 10,000 lower-grade spirit stones. How extravagant! Su Ming frowned. With a step forward, he walked to the side of the 7 old men who were meditating with their eyes closed. With a swing of his arm, the 7 people felt a chill run down their spines. Surprised and wary, they opened their eyes, but immediately after, they found themselves dumbfounded. The first thing they saw was that the hidden dragon lantern that they were trying to ignite had actually disappeared. What made them even more aghast was that the prayer mats woven from the spirit incense grass under them had also disappeared. In the end, they subconsciously looked around, and all 7 of them gaped in shock. A cold chill filled their hearts because they saw that the 3 statues in the main hall had disappeared without a trace. Su Ming moved forward. There was another hall before him, and at that moment, the sounds of battle reverberated in the sky. Long arcs flew up from the ground, and there were also long arcs descending from the sky. Slaughter, fighting, crazed laughter, and screams of pain filled the world. Once Su Ming took a few steps forward, he suddenly came to a halt and lowered his head to look at the floor tiles under his feet. Just how rich is Hidden Dragon's sect? Su Ming crouched down and knocked on the floor tiles. A brilliant light appeared in his eyes, and he lifted his right hand and pushed his palm against the ground. With it, the floor tiles around him immediately started trembling, and with cracking sounds, they flew up. With a swing of his arm, Su Ming collected all of them. A hint of excitement appeared on Su Ming's face. These floor tiles were not spirit stones, and neither were they medicinal herbs. They were medicinal dregs. These medicinal dregs were the leftovers from failed attempts at creating medicinal cores. They were originally discarded, but there was still some essence contained within them. If they were solidified into medicinal dregs and turned into medicinal dregs, then the floor would naturally release their medicinal properties. Once they fused with the spiritual aura of the world, the effects would become even better. Burning passion appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He looked at the numerous halls waiting for him before him, and with one move, his footsteps became even faster. There was not a single person in the second hall. Clearly, all of them had gone out to fight against evil spirit sect. There was a large amount of ancient scrolls in this place, and all of them were shining with a gentle light. Su Ming swept his gaze over them and put away all of them. He then looked at the bookshelves, took a few steps forward, and once he touched them, he let out a long sigh. Lightning strike would. Hidden Dragon sect. Oh, Hidden Dragon sect. As he shook his head, Su Ming immediately put away all the items in the hall into his storage bag without holding back. Before he left, he cast a glance at the buildings in the hall, and a look of pity appeared on his face. The materials used to build these halls are pretty good, but it's a pity that they're too big. It's not easy to take them away. As Su Ming spoke, his gaze fell on the carvings on the walls around him. These carvings were of gentle, auspicious beasts, and their eyes were decorated with high-grade spirit stones. Su Ming immediately took a few steps forward and circled the hall once. Once he took away all the spirit stones carved into the eyes of the auspicious beasts, he cast a glance at the hall, got up, and cut off most of the crossbeam. Only then did he leave with a sense of pity in his heart. There were 4 Hidden Dragon sect disciples guarding the third hall nervously. All of them had their heads lifted to look at the sky, and fear appeared on their faces. These 4 people naturally did not notice Su Ming's arrival. In fact, even when he stepped into the third hall, the 4 people outside did not know about it. When Su Ming looked at the hall, even if he was mentally prepared, he was still momentarily stunned and sucked in a sharp breath. The third hall was filled with an endless amount of medicinal herbs. These herbs were all surrounded by gentle circles of light, and they looked like they were still growing. At the same time, there were also a large amount of seals in the hall, and these seals were protecting these herbs. Clearly, this was the place where Hidden Dragon sects stored their herbs. In the past, they would either trade for these herbs, give them to these disciples, or reward them based on their contributions. Yet now, this place belonged to Su Ming. When Su Ming left the third hall, his footsteps became even faster. His body practically turned into a bolt of lightning as he charged towards the fourth hall in the distance. On the way there, he spread out his powerful divine sense and swept it through the area. In an instant, he moved forward, and all the things that caught his attention in his divine sense would be instantly snatched away by him. An old man charged into the sky with a dark expression on his face. There were 3 people following behind him, and all 3 of them were children. Each of them held an ancient-looking sword in their hands. There was also a horsetail whisk before the old man. He held it in his hand, and the hairs on the horsetail whisk exuded waves of freezing air. If anyone took a closer look, they would find that those were not hairs, but wisps of ice that were as thin as hair. Yet right at the instant the old man flew into the sky with the 3 children guarding the treasures behind him, a gust of freezing wind charged past them. The old man was momentarily stunned, and his expression immediately changed drastically. When he turned his head around, he saw the 3 confused children. The 3 swords in their hands had already disappeared without a trace. "Who is it? Who is it?" The old man's face was filled with rage. As he roared, a faint voice suddenly reached his ears. "This horsetail whisk is pretty good as well. I'll be taking it." That voice came incredibly suddenly. The old man shuddered, and when he turned his head around, his horsetail whisk had already disappeared. The connection between him and the wisp of divine sense on it had also been immediately cut off. Within a cave abode in Hidden Dragon Sect was a middle-aged man with a dark expression on his face. The ripples of power belonging to the immortals at the soul transformation stage could be sensed from his body. He glared at the medicinal cauldron before him, and with some hesitation, he lifted his right hand and struck it. Immediately, the medicinal cauldron shattered, and 3 medicinal cores flew out from within. Once he put them away into his storage bag, he quickly left and went to the next chamber in the cave abode. When he walked past all the chambers and put away the storage bag, he cast a glance at the people fighting in the sky. He saw a large number of Hidden Dragon Sect cultivators dying, and saw the evil spirit sect members scattering in all directions, killing and robbing others madly with a murderous aura that surged into the sky. The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and charged towards a hidden path not too far away. But before he could go too far, a cold gust of wind blew towards him. The next moment, he felt pain in his head, and he lost consciousness before falling to the ground. Su Ming revealed himself with an indifferent expression on his face. Once he took the man's storage bag, he saw a rather strange place with his divine sense. There were dozens of people guarding that place, and they were protecting an old man with a dark expression on his face. That old man was swiftly fleeing. The best things are usually not left untouched, but taken away when disaster strikes. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he took a step forward. At that moment, as the evil spirit sect members scattered, 3 people, with the thin man who had wanted to kill Su Ming during the blood sacrifice as their leader, stepped into the first hall to the left of the suspension bridge. The 7 old men in the hall had already disappeared. When the thin inner sect disciple saw that there were no statues, no cushions, and nothing else in the empty hall, the thin inner sect disciple let out a cold harumph. Once he walked out of the hall, the other 2 people followed behind him, and the 3 of them charged toward the second hall. Yet on the way, the expressions of the 3 people gradually turned strange. "Damn it! Who was it that knocked out all the tiles on the ground before us and took them away?" The thin man cursed with a dark expression on his face. The other 2 people beside him were momentarily stunned, and their expressions turned even stranger. He must have gone mad from being so poor. He didn't even let go of the tiles. As the 3 of them charged forward, they soon arrived at the second hall, but once they entered, they saw that it was empty, and their expressions turned even more sour. Just who was it that was ahead of us? That guy. He didn't even let go of the eyes of the statues. The 2 people beside the thin inner sect disciple immediately started cursing. "That's nothing. Look up there." The other person sighed and pointed upwards. When the other 2 lifted their heads and saw that most of the beams in the hall were missing, the 2 of them instantly fell silent. "We'll chase after them and see who did it. No matter what, we have to snatch some of them back." The thin inner sect disciple gritted his teeth and spat out hatefully. The three of them charged out of the second hall, and when they arrived before the third hall, they saw the four Hidden Dragon sect members fighting against their fellow evil spirit sect disciples, and the three of them immediately became filled with anticipation. If there's someone guarding this hall, then that damn greedy bastard didn't barge into this hall. With excitement, the three of them immediately rushed out. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 696. Su Ming naturally did not know what sort of method these three people used to fight against their fellow sect members, how they won in the end, killed the four Hidden Dragon sect disciples guarding the third palace, charged into the third palace, and looked at the familiar empty space. He also did not care about what sort of trauma his actions had left in these three people's hearts. He had already swept through all the places to the left of the suspension bridge with his divine sense, and it could be said that his rewards were incredibly bountiful. If the buildings and cave abodes to the right of the suspension bridge had not been plundered by evil spirit sect people as they fought against each other, his interest would definitely have been piqued. However, even if there were people from evil spirit sect there, Su Ming still had the thought of getting a share of the loot. However, that thought was attracted by the old man, protected by the dozen-something Hidden Dragon sect disciples. As he charged forward, Su Ming saw a large amount of corpses. There were men and women among them, and most of them belonged to Hidden Dragon sect. There were also some who belonged to evil spirit sect, but there were clearly fewer of them. Similarly, he also saw that the souls of the people who had died did not disappear. Instead, they had been sucked into the sky. Clearly, there was an item in the sky that could absorb souls. When Su Ming lifted his head, a glint appeared in his eyes, and he saw an indistinct figure sitting cross-legged in the endless sky. There was a small bottle before that person, and it was this item that was absorbing the souls of the dead. The dead Hidden Dragon sect disciples on the ground were in incredibly wretched states. They either had their Dantian regions dug out and their golden cores taken away, or their bodies had been torn to shreds and they had self-destructed. There was also a crack at the top of their skulls. That was the sign of a nascent soul forcefully leaving its body, and it was likely that this nascent soul had already been devoured by someone. The female cultivators were in an even more wretched state. If they were beautiful, it would naturally be difficult for them to escape the fate of becoming furnaces. As he moved forward, Su Ming saw an evil spirit sect outer sect disciple standing up with a ferocious smile and kicking the woman's head on the ground. Then, a glint appeared in his eyes, and just as he was about to leave, a sigh reached his ears. This was the last sound he heard in his life. After he sighed, his eyes widened. A bloody hole had appeared at the center of his brows, and he fell to the ground, side by side with the female corpse whose head was now a bloody mess. One of the female corpse's eyeballs fell to the side when her head exploded. It stared at the dead man for an eternity. Su Ming's body appeared, and he walked forward. Before long, the dozen-something Hidden Dragon sect disciples protecting the old man appeared before Su Ming with his divine sense. They had already descended into Thousand River Valley, and, as the crowd charged forward, they could see an active relocation rune right before them. This rune had clearly been hidden, which was why those from Evil Spirit sect had not noticed it. As long as these people stepped into the relocation rune, they would immediately be relocated out of this place. However, right at the instant these dozen-something people charged forward, all of them, including the old man who was being protected, came to an abrupt halt. Their expressions turned dark, and there was even despair on their faces. All of this was because a person had walked out of the air beyond the relocation rune. He was dressed in blue robes, had an aloof expression on his face, and there was a chilling look in his eyes. He was Evil Spirit Sect's Grand Sect Elder, Shendong. Fellow Taoist Gu, why are you in such a hurry? Shendong. The old man who was being protected by the crowd immediately turned livid with rage and glared at Shendong. Evil Sect, How dare you act so arrogantly and break the agreement between the immortals and evil sect? No matter how well you hide this, the immortal superior sects will still find out about it. At that time, we won't be fighting in the land of berserkers, but in the land of immortals. I refuse to believe that evil sect can fight against the joint attack of the other sects in the land of immortals, the old man shouted hoarsely. This is not something I can bother myself with. Fellow Taoist Gu, since we've known each other for a long time, hand over that bright yang stone, and I will leave your corpse in one piece. I will just devour your nascent divinity. One bright yang stone can only be created after 10,000 immortal souls have gathered together. It is an important item that can allow us to return to the land of immortals, and it is also the foundation of a sect that will descend in the land of berserkers and establish itself here. With my lowly status, there is no way I can possess this sort of item. The old man laughed coldly, and his words were resolute. Every single branch of Hidden Dragon Sect will be given a small piece of bright yang stone when they are established. It's fine if you don't want to admit it, but once I kill you, I will naturally be able to obtain it. As Shundong spoke, he took a step forward. At the instant he did so, the people protecting the old man behind him were just about to cast their arts when Shundong's foot landed. Yet, right at that moment, at the instant Shundong's foot landed, his body let out a hum and turned into 20-something clones. All of these clones were exactly the same, and as they charged forward, they swiftly shot through the area around the old man, named Gu, like flowing rays of light. There were no shrill screams of pain, nor were there any loud rumbles. There was only a buzzing sound, and when it ended, it gradually disappeared. Shindong's clones also dispersed, and only one remained, and it appeared less than 10 feet away from the old man named Gu. As for the people protecting the old man behind him, all of them had dumbfounded expressions on their faces as they fell to the ground. Their bodies turned into a pool of blood that seeped into the sand on the ground. A thick stench of blood surrounded the area, and this scene caused the old man's face to turn even paler. Great Blood Shadow clone art. I didn't expect that you would actually manage to successfully practice this evil art. The old man laughed brokenly and took a few steps back, but at the instant he took the second step, his body exploded with a bang. That explosion came incredibly suddenly, and as the impact formed by his abrupt collapse tumbled backwards in all directions, his nascent soul swept up a storage bag from the old man's crumbling body and charged into the air, fleeing madly. However, before he could flee 100 feet away, the air before him immediately distorted, and a person walked out. That person was naturally Bao Qiu. The old man's nascent soul let out a piercing howl and immediately changed its direction. But before it could even fly 100 feet away, another person walked out from the air. When the old man's nascent soul changed its direction a few times, the 8 evil sect immortals who had previously followed behind Shindong appeared around him and coldly blocked the old man's nascent soul's escape. You won't be able to escape, fellow Taoist Gu. Shindong walked out from the impact and dust formed by the old man's self-destruction. His expression was still as aloof as ever as he spoke languidly. Despair appeared on the old man's nascent soul's face at that moment. Just as he was about to do something, he was suddenly taken aback, but that shock only lasted for an instant before disappearing. Immediately after, he tossed the storage bag in his hand into the distance. Once he did so, he instantly charged in the opposite direction. Because of that, all the people's gazes, including Shundong's, were immediately attracted by the storage bag. The evil spirit sect elder who was the closest to the storage bag was a pure immortal who had descended to this place. At that moment, a glint appeared in his eyes, and he charged towards the storage bag. Once he got close, he lifted his right hand, intending to grab it. However, right at the instant his hand was about to touch the storage bag, a hand shot out from the space beside him and seized the storage bag before he could do so. This scene was incredibly sudden, causing all the people's gazes to focus. At the same time, when the evil spirit sect elder saw that the storage bag was about to be snatched away, he did not have time to think. With a furious roar, he formed a seal with his right hand positioned two of his fingers into the shape of a sword, and swiftly sliced down at the hand that had shot out from the space. A cold harumph reverberated through the area, and once the hand from the depths of the space seized the storage bag, it did not dodge the finger sword that came slashing down towards it. Instead, it used the back of its hand to clash against it. A loud bang immediately rang out, and right before everyone's eyes, the descending evil spirit sect disciple shuddered and coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. His body was immediately sent tumbling backwards, as if the power that came from the back of that hand was so strong that it could crush him. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, only an instant had passed since the start of the fight. As the evil spirit sect elder coughed up blood and fell backwards, a person walked out from the space. That person stood tall and straight. There was a black mask on his face, and he was dressed in a black robe. His long hair danced in the wind, and he held the storage bag in his hand. His eyes under the mask were looking at the crowd coldly. The people in this place might not be familiar with that mask, but if this was the land of the shamans, then there would be quite a number of people who would know who that mask belonged to. The person wearing that mask was naturally Su Ming. He did not want to give up on such a good place to heal himself in evil spirit sect, which was why he had put on that mask when he appeared. There might be quite a lot of cracks on it, and it had even shattered in the past, but it could still be used to hide his face. Shen Dong's pupils shrank, and he stared at Su Ming as he asked languidly, "Sir, who are you?" Bao Qiu looked at Su Ming. With the connection between their souls, she could tell with just one glance that this person was her young master. She blinked, but did not make a sound. Su Ming put away the storage bag and said coldly, "Why are you spouting so much nonsense? I'm taking that bright yang stone." How conceited. Another evil sect immortal who had descended by the side, a white-haired old man, instantly let out a low growl. As immortals who had descended to this place, they had always believed themselves to be prideful. When they saw that there was someone who dared to snatch their items and that they had the advantage in numbers, they took a step forward as they spoke. The others did the same. Bao Qiu was also forced to do the same. Only Shen Dong's pupils shrank, and his expression turned incredibly grim. Almost at the instant these immortals closed in on him and began forming seals to cast their arts, a brilliant light appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The power of his berserker bones erupted from his entire body. He lifted his right hand and hurled a punch towards the ground. At the instant his fist landed, the entire ground started trembling as if an earth dragon was tumbling about. As the ground rose and fell as if it had turned into waves, wisps of black smoke seeped out from the ground. When Su Ming lifted his right hand, that black smoke swiftly gathered in his hand and turned into a long spear of 30 feet. The Undertaker of Evil's Spear. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Su Ming lifted his head, and a cold sneer appeared at the corners of his lips, which were hidden under the mask. I'll make up for one chapter first. There are still 2 chapters to go. I'll make up for it as soon as possible over the next few days. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 697. If you fight, you will have to pay a price. That spear was originally purple, but this time, when it manifested and gathered in Su Ming's hand, it turned black. That complete darkness seemed to symbolize death, and a powerful murderous aura swept outwards from Su Ming. That murderous aura was definitely not something to be trifled with. It had already gained physical form, and as it spread out, a vortex could be seen howling around Su Ming's body. It was as if the vortex had turned into a whirlwind, and as it roared, it wanted to tear apart the world. Su Ming's dyed black hair floated in the air as he stood in the vortex. He lifted his head, and a freezing glare shone in his eyes under the mask. At that instant, the hearts of all the people who were walking towards him trembled, and they felt as if there was thunder rumbling in their heads. They were all suppressed by Su Ming's presence. It was especially so when he said those words. His expression and presence were suppressive, and every single one of them was like the might of heaven that crashed into the people's hearts, causing them to feel as if Su Ming had turned into a bloodthirsty, murderous, and undefeatable evil immortal. As that cold sneer curled up the corners of Su Ming's lips, he tightened his grip around the Undertaker of Evil's spear and took a step forward. With his own power, besides Shundong and the person who had just coughed up blood and retreated, he was fighting against the remaining 7 people. These 7 people were all immortals who had descended to this place, and all of them were pure-blooded immortals. They were not berserkers, and even if they were in the Immortals' evil sect, they were still outstanding berserkers. Even the weakest among them was equivalent to those in the middle stage of the Berserker Soul realm and in the Soul Transformation realm. It was especially so for one of them. He was an old man with gray hair and was dressed in gray robes. There was a slight protrusion on his back that made him look like a hunchback. He was the strongest person in Evil Spirit's sect besides Shundong. He was also the one who had called Su Ming arrogant just now. His level of cultivation had also reached ascendance. He might only be in the initial stage of ascendance, but among the immortals, those who could reach ascendance were definitely not ordinary. As the hunchbacked old man's pupils shrank, the 6 people around him formed seals with their hands, and divine abilities swiftly manifested. Almost at the instant they executed their divine abilities, Su Ming took 3 steps forward with the Undertaker of Evil's spear in hand. When his first step landed, he thrust the long spear in his hand forward. With it, a piercing sound of air being sliced apart came from the air, and a crack in space was instantly sliced open, forming an arc that charged towards the gray-haired old man, who was the strongest person besides Shindong. The white-haired old man lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pushed his palm forward. Immediately, a ray of blue light manifested in his hand and turned into a bluebird. It flapped its wings and rushed towards Su Ming's first spear thrust towards him. At the instant the Undertaker of Evil's spear crashed into the bird, a shocking booming sound spread out, and the bird exploded. At the same time, Su Ming took his second step, and with his second spear thrust, he shot through the air with a hum and appeared right in front of the gray-haired old man's face. That spear thrust was too quick, so quick that before the old man could see it clearly, the freezing cold at the tip of the spear erupted forth with a bang, causing his hair to be torn behind him. Shock immediately appeared on the gray-haired old man's face. He might have judged Su Ming's level of cultivation in his heart and believed that since he dared to snatch food from the tiger's mouth, then he definitely had some sort of ability. However, he still did not expect that Su Ming would be so strong. The first step and the first spear had destroyed his resistance, and the second step and the second spear had appeared right in front of him. A power that could destroy the sky and earth came from the tip of the spear, causing the old man's skin to instantly crawl. In the midst of his shock, he could even vaguely sense a presence that belonged to the immortals in the second step from the second spear. This was enough to make his soul scatter, but he was, after all, a powerful immortal in ascendance. At that moment, even though he was terrified, he still retreated without any hesitation. As he formed a seal with his hands, a gigantic shield immediately flew out from his storage bag. That shield was entirely green and exuded an overflowing life force. It was round in shape, and there were a large amount of runic symbols carved on it. Once it appeared, a powerful green light immediately erupted from it. Once the gray-haired old man brought out the shield, he immediately let out a loud shout. As a shout reverberated in the air, the shield changed with a bang. It looked as if it had originally been overlapping with each other, but at that moment, it split up and turned into 9 identical shields. They stacked on top of each other and immediately blocked off Su Ming's second spear thrust. The gray-haired old man's heart was already filled with shock. He no longer thought about how to fight against Su Ming. Instead, he wanted to leave as quickly as possible and avoid being locked down by this terrifying existence. He had a strong feeling that the shield would not be able to stop Su Ming for long, but he only needed that one instant of Su Ming's pause, and he would immediately warp away. All of this had happened in the span of a few breaths from the moment Su Ming took his first step. It was so fast that no one could react to it. The others were still closing in on him and casting their arts. But even if there were his fellow sect members around him, the old man still had the feeling that he was alone in the midst of an army of enemies after Su Ming's 2 consecutive spear thrusts. That feeling did not end. The instant he wanted to stop did not arrive either. Almost at the instant he brought out his shield, Su Ming's long spear pierced it. An even more deafening boom surged into the sky at that instant, and the first of the 9 shields shattered into pieces, followed by the second, third, fourth, and fifth shields. The sky-piercing shield instantly shattered and exploded, forming a wave of impact that caused all the people who wanted to get close to Su Ming to feel their hearts tremble. The 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th shields also shattered with loud bangs under Su Ming's long spear's unstoppable force. As an endless amount of shards swept through the area, Su Ming took his 3rd step. When his 3rd step landed, his long spear stabbed out a 3rd time. The 3rd stab brought with it a piercing sound that caused piercing pain in the ears of all the people around him. It charged straight towards the white-haired old man's face, who was retreating. The speed of that spear surpassed that of the 2nd spear thrust, and it even surpassed the speed of the people's divine senses. The murderous aura and chilling air within it caused the gray-haired old man's retreating body to come to an instinctive halt. His entire body immediately turned cold, and he felt as if there were shrill, vengeful souls howling in his ears. A slightly dazed expression appeared on his face. He widened his eyes, and illusory pictures appeared in his head. In those pictures, he saw all the people who had died in the Undertaker of Evil's spear, as well as the countless wretched deaths. The souls under the Undertaker of Evil's spear will not enter the cycle of reincarnation and will not scatter from the world. They will live on for eternity, and they will be imprisoned in the Undertaker of Evil's spear. They will be the spear's soul. Those words echoed in the gray-haired old man's head, causing his body to tremble. He saw hundreds of battle souls exuding a monstrous, murderous aura. These battle souls charged towards him with a long spear, as if they wanted to tear his body apart. Save me. The gray-haired old man was indeed a powerful immortal in ascendance. After all, Su Ming's spear strike already possessed the presence of life cultivation. The might of that spear strike could shake the sky and earth, and it was especially so after it went through the baptism in freezing sky, Clan's Heaven Gate. The number of souls in the spear had increased by quite a large margin, and its might had become even stronger. However, the gray-haired old man had managed to recover a hint of his intelligence from the illusory struggles he was in when the Undertaker of Evil's spear closed in on him and called out for help. It was a telling sign that this person's willpower was not that of an ordinary person. However, he ran into Su Ming. At the instant he cried out for help, the people closed in on him, and Shundong's pupil shrank, and he took a step forward. The gray-haired old man's heart was filled with shock and fear, and he even regretted choosing to descend to the land of berserkers in the past. At the instant the gray-haired old man's heart was filled with shock and fear, and he even regretted choosing to descend to the land of berserkers in the past. A bloody gash appeared at the center of his brows. At the instant that gash spread out, the old man's heart quietened down. The world before his eyes stopped moving. There was only a long black spear that had pierced through the center of his brows, and a small part of it had come out from the back of his head. A power that could destroy all things spread out from the Undertaker of Evil's spear and rushed into his body. As banging sounds rang in the air, blood trickled out of the corners of the old man's mouth. His eyes were bloodshot, but his pupils were unfocused and lifeless. Before his nascent soul could even escape, it was crushed by the power of the Undertaker of Evil's spear and absorbed back into his body. Blood dripped down from the tip of the spear that had pierced through the back of the old man's head. When it fell to the ground, it let out a cracking sound. That sound continued ringing in the air, and when the blood from the tip of the spear fell to the ground, it drew a bloody line in the air, causing the entire area to fall into dead silence at that instant. Shandong appeared several dozens of feet away. His expression was dark, and it was incredibly sour. As he looked at Su Ming, wariness appeared in his eyes, but there was also a dark look on his face. As for the other people, their actions of casting their arts came to an abrupt halt. All of them stood where they were and looked at Su Ming in shock. They watched his long spear pierce through the center of the gray-haired old man's brows, watched the bloody line on the ground, and heard the sound of blood falling to the ground. Bao Qiu's heart pounded against her chest. She might have known that Su Ming was strong, but she had never expected that he would be able to kill a powerful immortal in ascendance in less than the span of a few breaths. This could practically be considered as an instant kill. From the beginning to the end, all of this was done with the power of the spear 3 steps Su Ming took. The strongest evil spirit sex people were all around him, and at the instant the people around him started casting their arts, Su Ming attacked in an incredibly domineering manner and killed one person with every 3 steps he took. The people he killed were all powerful immortals in ascendance from evil sect. I told you, if you fight, you will pay the price. Who will be next? Su Ming asked calmly, and the long spear in his hand was slowly pulled out from the center of the gray-haired old man's brows. As the spear left the old man's body, the gray-haired old man, a powerful immortal in ascendance, fell to the ground, unmoving. The second step, Nirvana Scryer Realm. This is the power of those in the second step. He's not a Nirvana Scryer. He's a berserker. The presence he exuded just now was a berserker's presence. Life Cultivation Realm. The expressions of the immortals who descended to this place changed at that moment. Their gazes as they looked towards Su Ming were immediately replaced by terror and shock. Shandong stared at the spear in Su Ming's hand and said hoarsely, "The Undertaker of Evil Spear." To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 698. Shandong took a step forward and spoke languidly. We immortals have a saying. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind it. My fellow Taoist, it's clear that you hid your face because you were worried that someone would recognize you. Let me call you fellow Taoist oriole. He stared into Su Ming's eyes, and there was a grim look on his face. In truth, he had already noticed that there was something off about Su Ming. It was a presence that made him wary. That was why he had not attacked and had instead allowed the others to test him. Yet even he had not expected that Su Ming would kill the second strongest person in Evil Spirit Sect with just 3 steps. Even he had to be prepared to report this to Evil Sect's Serene. After all, the person who died was not a berserker who had changed his blood inheritance, but a true descendant of Evil Sect. The death of this sort of person, especially one who was in ascendance, was definitely not a small matter to Evil Sect. Fellow Taoist Oriole, you schemed and snuck into Hidden Dragon Sect while we were slaughtering our way into the sect. I believe that even if we gathered all the items that the Evil Spirit Sect disciples plundered, they would not be able to compare to yours, especially that bright yang stone. But my fellow Taoist, this battle was not worth it. With my understanding of that Gu Yuan Hai, he definitely has something up his sleeves. The storage bag he brought out is most likely just a cover. The real bright yang stone should have been hidden away by him. As Shandong spoke, his eyes sparkled. He stared into Su Ming's eyes and took another step forward. Su Ming remained as calm as ever. He did not speak and only watched Shandong take that step forward. You killed an Evil Spirit Sect elder, and we will not let this matter rest so easily. Evil Sect's Slaughter Division will naturally come after you. But before that, I would like to fight against you, fellow Taoist Oriole. I believe that you don't want to waste your time here. You stalled us and gave Gu Yuan Hai time to escape. This must be part of the deal you made with him, right? There is no bright yang stone in that storage bag, but there should be some hidden treasures of Hidden Dragon Sect within it, or else with your cunning, you wouldn't have fallen for it. Since that's the case, we will have a limit of 3 moves. We won't kill each other during these 3 moves, and after these 3 moves, we will no longer try to stop each other. What do you say? Shandong asked languidly. Once he spoke, understanding immediately appeared on the faces of some of the people whose thoughts were slightly slower. Su Ming narrowed his eyes, and a hint of surprise shone in them. What Shandong said was almost the same as the truth. If he could deduce these things from just a few clues, then it could be seen just how cunning this person was. In truth, it was just as Shandong had said. Su Ming did not care too much about that bright young stone. He did not know much about what it was, so it was only natural that he would not engage in too much slaughter for it. It was also impossible for him to kill all the people here and obtain the bright young stone for himself. This was not in line with his interests. That was why when Hidden Dragon Sect's nascent soul was in danger of leaving his body, Su Ming had sent out a ripple of his divine sense to send a message to Hidden Dragon Sect's Gu. He did not want that bright young stone. Gu, he had Su's request, and Gu, and Gu, and the things, and he and the old, and. This was a deal, and during that critical moment, the old Gu had no time to think about his gains and losses. He had to agree to it, and that was why the scene just now had happened. Su Ming smiled faintly. Since Shandong had managed to see through his plan, then there was no longer any need for him to hide it. As he smiled, he opened his mouth. 3 moves? Fine. A brilliant light shone in Shandong's eyes. He had been waiting for this sentence, or else he would not have spoken so much and only said those words in the end. This person's strength made him incredibly wary. He did not have the confidence to win against this sort of powerful warrior, but if this person insisted on interfering, then it would be incredibly difficult for him to complete his mission. After all, as time passed, Gu Yuan Hai would escape further and further away. Evil Spirit Sect might have sealed off all the relocation runes in the area, but if they were delayed and Gu Yuan Hai ran out of the sealed area, then it would be incredibly difficult for them to search for him, and it would be easy for accidents to happen. All of you go and chase after Gu Yuan Hai. As Shandong spoke, he took a step toward Su Ming. When he lifted his right hand, a red whip immediately appeared in his hand. When he swung it, thunderous rumbles immediately reverberated from the whip, and a large number of balls of lightning also appeared. As they let out sizzling sounds, they fused together and charged toward Su Ming. The 7 people, including Bao Qiu, cast each other a glance and immediately turned into long arcs that charged into the sky. Bao Qiu originally did not want to leave, but it was not convenient for her to stay at that moment. So, she left with the group. It was difficult for her to calm down. Su Ming's figure of killing a person with 3 steps and 3 spear strikes was branded deeply into her mind, and it did not disappear even after a long time had passed. Su Ming did not stop them from leaving. He looked at Shandong, and fighting spirit gradually appeared in his eyes. He lifted his right hand and tightened his grip around the Undertaker of Evil Spear. Immediately, the spear let out a hum and turned into a large amount of black smoke. When Su Ming grabbed it, he threw it towards the incoming balls of lightning in the sky and the whip in Shandong's hand. With a bang, the Undertaker of Evil's spear turned into a wisp of black smoke that instantly closed in on the balls of lightning. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, the spear shot through the air and appeared before Shandong. A glint appeared in Shandong's eyes, and as if he had come to an understanding, he let go of the whip in his hand. Immediately, the Undertaker of Evil's spear swept up the long whip and instantly charged several thousands of feet forward. With a loud bang, it stabbed the ground. You can't win against me in enchanted treasures, so let's compete in divine abilities, Su Ming said flatly. He would no longer use the Undertaker of Evil's spear in this battle. He did not have many chances to run into a powerful warrior like Shandong. Now that he had run into one, he wanted to witness just what sort of level he had reached without using any external power. We won't use enchanted treasures. We'll just compete in divine abilities. All right. Shandong might be sullen most of the time, but since he could become a grand sect elder, he naturally had his own charisma. When he heard Su Ming's words, he nodded. As he nodded, Dong formed a seal with his right hand, and, after changing it several times, he swung it before him. Immediately, a flash of purplish-red light appeared out of nowhere in front of him. As that light flashed, it turned into a bird. That bird was entirely purplish-black in color, and its eyes shone with brutality. At the same time, there was a tall bulge squirming on its back, and a small black person crawled out from that bulge. It threw its head back and let out a piercing howl. Its body seemed to be connected to the bird. That bird looked like a cuckoo, but it was ferocious and murderous. Almost at the same time it appeared, another bird manifested by its side. That was a crimson eagle. That eagle's eyes were blood red, and there was madness in them. There was also a bump squirming on its back, and a small black humanoid appeared. After the eagle was the eagle, and after it was the winged rocks. Each of them was slightly larger than the other. There were 4 birds in total, and they were all roaring in front of Dong. This is my 4 birds movement art. I killed 4 people in the same stage as me in ascendance with this art when I was in the land of immortals. I used their souls and nascent divinities to refine this art. Dong said calmly. He did not immediately attack, but instead looked towards Su Ming. Su Ming looked at the 4 birds. He could clearly sense a deep wave of resentment filling the air. That resentment seemed to have been suppressed all this while and could not be vented. As time passed, it grew deeper, causing the world to immediately become a little indistinct when they appeared. It was as if the endless amount of resentment in the world had also been affected and was continuously gathering towards this place from all directions. What a powerful resentment! Su Ming cast the 4 birds glance. It did not matter whether Dong was telling him the name of this divine ability and how he created it, because this was a show of respect. This was a show of respect toward the powerful. It was also a form of acknowledgement towards Su Ming's status. Clearly, in Dong's eyes, the current Su Ming was someone who could stand on equal footing with him. Even if this person was a berserker, and even if the 2 of them did not belong to the same race, he still had to show the respect he deserved. This was also the first time Su Ming felt this sort of respect from a powerful warrior. He cast Dong a glance, then lifted his right hand and positioned 2 of his fingers into the shape of a sword. He then slowly swiped his left hand from the base of his fingers to the tip of his fingers, as if his fingers had turned into an invisible sword. As he swiped his left hand, even when it left his right hand, he still maintained his slow motion. When it was 7 feet away, golden light immediately shone from Su Ming's right hand. As that light reached a piercing degree, Su Ming spread open all 5 fingers on his right hand. Immediately, the golden light that was spreading outwards tumbled backwards and covered his right hand like flowing water, causing his right hand to look as if it had turned into a golden hue. Then, Su Ming formed another seal with his right hand. With a swing of his arm, the golden light became even brighter, and the flesh on Su Ming's right hand started withering slightly. But Su Ming did not stop there. He formed 8 seals in one go, and every single time they appeared, his right hand would change. When he formed the 9th seal, his entire right hand was reduced to skin and bones. The golden light had also changed and turned black. Because of that, Su Ming's right hand looked like a skeleton. His black fingers and long fingernails were a stark contrast to his arm. This divine ability has no name. I gained an epiphany towards the Candle Dragon's undying and imperishable world. During the 50 cycles of life and death, I gained an epiphany towards the source of righteousness and reverse and fuse them into my hand. The number of souls who died under this divine ability is innumerable. That was the beginning, and after I used the 9 transformations art just now, I managed to transform it 9 times in a row, and now I can bring out the peak of its power. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at Dong as he spoke languidly. Dong's pupils shrank. He had refined this ability after killing 4 powerful immortals in Ascendance, and it was already incredibly shocking among his peers. However, when he heard Su Ming's words, he could not help but suck in a sharp breath. In truth, when he saw Su Ming executing this divine ability, his heart had already trembled, and he seemed to have thought of something, but he did not dare to be certain. Candle Dragon. 9 transformations. Shundong's expression had already turned incredibly grave, and he became even more cautious than when he was facing the Berserker's disaster. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 699. Almost at the instant the power Su Ming had come to understand from the undying and imperishable world erupted from his right hand after it went through the 9 transformations, causing his right hand to look like a bag of bones, like a skeleton. A grim expression appeared on Shundong's face. He formed a seal with his hands and pointed forward. Immediately, the 4 birds in front of him, starting from the cuckoo to the rock, roared and flapped their wings to charge towards Su Ming. The 4 small black humanoids that had grown together with the birds on their backs opened their mouths wide and let out piercing screeches. As they formed seals with their hands, they controlled the birds to close in on him in the blink of an eye. Su Ming remained calm. He did not look at the 4 incoming birds, but instead looked at his right hand. Almost at the instant the birds closed in and stirred up a huge gust of wind that caused Su Ming's hair to fly into the air, his right hand turned gold. At first glance, it looked like a golden hand bone. When he lifted the golden arm, he made a grabbing motion in the direction of the 4 incoming birds. The instant he did so, the cuckoo's body trembled, and it was frozen in midair. It was as if the laws of the world around it had changed, causing the air around it to instantly become corporeal. A powerful pressure was created, and it seemed as if the cuckoo was being forced to stay in midair. Soon after, the eagle let out a shrill screech when it was several dozens of feet away from the cuckoo. Its body, too, was forced to stop under the power of Su Ming's grab. Loud booming sounds came from within its body, and just like the cuckoo, its body was frozen in midair. As it struggled, the power that froze it became stronger. Next, as the eagle trembled viciously, it let out a piercing and shrill screech, and its body rushed 100-something feet away before it froze in midair due to the power of Su Ming's seas. When Su Ming froze the eagle, he took 2 steps back with a grim expression on his face. Clearly, fighting against this sort of divine ability was not easy for him. As for the final bird, the gigantic winged rock, it closed in with a loud whistle. The power of Su Ming's seas could only slow it down slightly, but it could not freeze it in midair. When the winged rock closed in with increasing speed, violent gusts of wind howled, and the weather changed. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He clenched his right hand into a fist. At the instant he clenched his fist, the cuckoo immediately crumbled with a bang, stirring up an endless wave of air that swept through the area. The eagle also shuddered and exploded, followed soon after by the eagle. As the 3 birds crumbled, the ripples stirred up by their destruction spread out, causing the sky to rumble non-stop, causing the gigantic winged rock's already slow body to have to face all the impact. As Su Ming clenched his right hand into a fist, wisps of white smoke tumbled backwards from the 3 birds that crumbled and filled his fist. They continued gathering together, and Su Ming's expression became even more solemn. Su Ming was already incredibly skilled in this seizing and absorbing art. Once he executed the 9 transformations, he suddenly had a strong feeling that there was a new change in his clenched fist. At the instant that feeling appeared, an enraged roar came from the impact of the collapse of the 3 birds. The winged rock's gigantic body swiftly broke free from the ripples created by the impact and charged out in an instant. It was so quick that it closed in on Su Ming in the blink of an eye, causing everything in the area to become indistinct. Only the ferocious winged rock remained incredibly clear. The small black humanoid on its back let out a piercing screech, and a destructive power came crashing into Su Ming's face. A brilliant glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Almost at the instant the winged rock closed in on him, he unclenched his right fist, pressed his fingers together to form a palm, and pushed it forward. The instant he threw his palm forward, the white mist surrounding Su Ming's palm instantly distorted, and the faint shadows of 3 birds could be seen filling the air. In the blink of an eye, the instant Su Ming's palm moved forward, it crashed into the winged rock. This scene was like a picture. Within it, Su Ming's hair danced in the air as he stood in midair. He had his right hand lifted before him, and what he was pressing down on was an incredibly gigantic winged rock. There was also a ferocious humanoid in black on the winged rock's back. Time seemed to have stopped along with the picture, but that stillness only lasted for an instant before it was completely torn apart by a loud bang that shook the sky and earth. In the midst of that bang, the winged rock's body started shattering inch by inch, and once the crack spread through its entire body, it was torn to pieces. Even the small black humanoid on its back let out a shrill screech and started disappearing under the violent gusts of wind, as if it had turned into a person made of sand. When it completely disappeared, Su Ming, who had been hidden by its gigantic body, was revealed. Su Ming's face was slightly pale, but he continued standing there. He did not take a single step backwards. His hair was still dancing in the air, but his eyes were closed at that moment. When the area around him gradually disappeared and everything returned to normal, Shundong stood not too far away. His face was pale, and there was a hint of shock within the complicated look on his face. Gaining an epiphany during a battle. I can't believe I ran into this sort of thing. Those who can gain an epiphany during a battle must have incredibly high comprehensive abilities. He hesitated for a moment and stared at Su Ming. After some time, he gave up on the thought of ambushing him. As a powerful immortal in ascendance, he could die in battle, but if he wanted to ambush someone, then he would not be able to go against the principles in his heart. Su Ming opened his eyes. The instant he struck with his palm just now, he had submerged himself in a strange state without his knowledge. That feeling was difficult to describe with words. It was as if everything around him had slowed down, and it was so slow that he had enough time to think and counterattack. In that slow state, he saw his right hand turning into a palm. At the instant he pushed forward, the white fog turned into 3 birds, and they were the creatures formed by Shundong's divine ability. As he watched them, a strange feeling rose in his heart. He felt as if he possessed the art of creation, and with that hand of his he could make all sorts of destructive existences manifest. Seize, suck, and push. Seize was to shatter, suck was to absorb, and push was to transform. In this strange state, he also saw Shundong's expression. In truth, Shundong's expression at that time had been magnified and slowed down several times in Su Ming's eyes. He could ponder and analyze it in detail, and if Shundong truly wanted to attack, then in Su Ming's current state, he would have enough time to wake up. This feeling of the world slowing down and him remaining the same made Su Ming's thoughts become much livelier. He had a strong feeling that if he could continue gaining an epiphany in this state for a long period of time, then he would be able to control the universe. However, it was a pity that this feeling only lasted for the span of a few breaths before it immediately disappeared. When everything returned to normal, Su Ming woke up. As a brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes, Shundong lifted his right hand. "I was not as good as you in our first match." A glint appeared in his eyes, and as he lifted his right hand, he formed a circle with his index finger and thumb before he pushed it towards the sky. Immediately, a large amount of black fog seeped out from his right hand and spread through the area. In the blink of an eye, it covered Shundong's entire body, and when layers of black fog layered on top of his body, a gigantic figure that was about 100-something feet tall appeared before Su Ming. That figure was completely formed by black fog, and it looked as if it was alive. Once it appeared, it lifted its head and let out a roar that sounded like thunder. Su Ming knew that Shundong was within that gigantic figure. This was the second time he had seen this sort of divine ability. The first time was when Shundong had executed this ability when he was fighting against the Berserker's disaster on Evil Spirit Sex Mountain. He might have been destroyed by the Berserker's disaster, but in truth, he had been completely unharmed. Giant spirit transformation is one of the three ultimate arts in evil spirit sect. The giant spirit formed by this art possesses the power to support the world, and it can absorb the spiritual aura around it so that it can grow endlessly. Fellow Taoist Oriole, take this strike from my giant spirit. Shindong's voice rumbled as it tumbled out of the giant's mouth. He did not move, but lifted his right hand and pulled it behind his back, causing his body to lean like a bow. Immediately after, as a shocking roar reverberated in the air, the giant of black fog clenched his right hand into a fist, and as if he had straightened his bow-shaped body, that gigantic fist let out a bang and hurled forward with a howl. The gigantic fist stirred up a sharp whistling sound as it tore through the air, causing the void to truly shatter. It was as if the void was unable to endure Shundong's divine ability. Wherever the fist passed, the void would shatter. Su Ming's pupils shrank. Stabbing pain filled his entire body at that moment, and in fact, he even lost his ability to breathe. He could clearly sense that as the giant opened his fist, it seemed to have extracted all the aura in the area, causing the place to instantly turn into a state similar to when he executed the third style of wind separation. It was as if all the aura in the area had been absorbed by that fist and turned into a shocking power that came charging towards him with a bang. However, he did not retreat. He could not retreat, and neither did he want to retreat. As expected of a powerful immortal who has attained great completion and ascendance, and is equivalent to a berserker who has attained great completion in the berserker soul realm. A strong fighting spirit appeared in Su Ming's eyes. This person respected him, and he also respected this powerful warrior. Even if their races were different, even if their dreams were different, even if their ways of living were completely different, this was the respect that belonged to the powerful, and Su Ming would still give it to him. The god of berserkers roar. I wonder which god of berserkers created it. As the fist came charging towards him, Su Ming spoke calmly. At the instant his words reverberated in the air, he let out his strongest roar towards the incoming fist. That roar rose swiftly, causing the area to immediately rumble. At the same time, Su Ming's cultivation base continued erupting from his body. Clearly, he had been holding back during the first match. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 700. His roar was like a wave of thunder in the world. At the instant it spread out, it caused Shundong's fist to immediately slow down when it was several dozens of feet away from Su Ming. His body also trembled as if he was about to disappear. And at that moment, what Su Ming brought out was 8/10 of the power in his body. This 8/10 of power was the peak he had reached in the past. Once he brought it out, the fist might have slowed down and looked as if it was about to disappear, but it was still moving forward. It was getting closer to Su Ming, and the destructive power spreading out from the fist made it seem as if it could destroy his body and soul if it landed on his body. Veins popped up on Shindong's face while he was hidden in the giant's shadow. All his power erupted from his body and turned into the giant's strongest power. It was a power that could fight against the berserker's disaster, causing the fist to swiftly increase in speed. With a bang, it seemed to have surpassed the peak Su Ming had reached in the past and closed in on him. However, 8/10 of his power was only the peak Su Ming had reached in the past. At that moment, he might not have recovered all of his power, but he was already close to 9/10 of it. This was the first time he brought out that extra 10th of his power. An explosive power spread out from Su Ming's body with a bang and fused into his god of berserker's roar, causing that wave of sound to instantly drown out all the other sounds in the world, as if it had replaced the operations of the world. And at that moment, it completely erupted forth. At the instant the roar reverberated in the air, the gigantic fist before Su Ming crumbled. As it shattered inch by inch, it tumbled backwards, and even the gigantic figure completely crumbled at that instant. As the fog figure shattered, Shundong coughed up a mouthful of blood and fell backwards. He staggered 10 steps backwards, and with each step he took, the air would tremble and with each step, he would move 10 feet. After those 10 steps, he was forced back 100 feet. Su Ming's face was pale. When the roar ended and the fog giant Shindong had turned and crumbled, he also coughed up a mouthful of blood and fell backwards. He also took 10 steps backwards before he managed to stabilize his body. His breathing quickened, and when he lifted his head, he looked at Shindong, who also had blood at the corner of his mouth. The two of them simply watched each other. During the first battle, both of them had clearly held back, which was why Shindong had been slightly weaker than Su Ming. However, during the second battle, Shindong had brought out his full power, and even if Su Ming had brought out the peak of his power before he was injured, he would still have been unable to fight against him. If it was not because he still had some hidden power, then he would have already lost this battle. When he revealed the 90% of his strength that was recovering, both of them coughed up a mouthful of blood and retreated 10 steps onto the monstrous rumble. They were evenly matched. Only an evenly matched battle would be the most satisfying. The two of them looked at each other from a distance of more than 200 feet. Neither of them spoke, only their gazes met. After some time, a smile gradually appeared at the corners of Shindong's lips, and it was the same for Su Ming. A smile appeared on his face, and it grew wider until it eventually turned into loud laughter. Shindong was laughing, and Su Ming was laughing. The two people who had been fighting against each other on the empty battlefield were laughing loudly at that moment, and there was not a hint of disharmony in their laughter. Instead, there was a perfect harmony between them. It was a form of appreciation for each other, a form of respect towards each other, and a form of affirmation and acknowledgement towards each other. This battle was exhilarating. As Shindong laughed, he lifted his right hand and patted his storage bag. Immediately, a gourd flew out from within. Once he caught it, he removed the stopper on it, and a thick fragrance of wine wafted out. He lifted his head and took a big swig from it. "Fellow Taoist Oriole, do you want it?" Shindong drank a huge mouthful of wine with his own blood, then looked at Su Ming with a smile. A hint of respect appeared in his eyes. This respect had never appeared since he came to the Berserker's world. Even when he was facing evil sex Jian, it was only respect. It was not the same as respect. "I'm a Berserker." Su Ming was still smiling, but a complicated look gradually appeared in his smile. That complicated feeling was because even though he had not had much of a relationship with this person, his words and actions during this battle had all obtained Su Ming's respect. That feeling of appreciation for each other had not only grown in Shindong's heart, it had also appeared in Su Ming's heart. However, the difference in their races had determined their fates. So what? You are the second person I've seen in the land of Berserkers who has obtained my respect and admiration. Fellow Taoist Oriole, you are bold but meticulous, and you are resolute in your actions. You clearly have a lot of enchanted treasures, and you even have the power of the Undertaker of Evil Spear, but you chose to abandon them. Just now, when you forced me back with that roar, you originally had the chance to injure me even more severely, but you chose not to use it. We might be of different races, but I only know that this battle was exhilarating. Fellow Taoist Oriole, this wine will only be given to those I acknowledge. I'll ask you one more time. Do you want it? Shindong looked at Su Ming, and his laughter reverberated in the air. His upright and bright presence immediately chased away all the ghastly air around him, revealing him. He might have come from evil sect, but there were also true men in evil sect. Su Ming looked at Shindong, then lifted his right hand swiftly and seized the air in the direction of the gourd. Immediately, that gourd flew out from Shindong's hand and charged towards Su Ming. Once Su Ming caught it, he looked at Shindong, placed it by his mouth, and took a big swig from it. This battle was indeed exhilarating. This wine is even more exhilarating. The wine in Su Ming's mouth turned into a wave of heat, and as if a line of fire had been drawn out, it spread through his body, allowing his cultivation base to recover a tiny bit. It might only be a hint, but it was enough to show just how valuable this wine was. Since you like this wine, then I'll give you the pot of wine in your hands. Shindong laughed heartily, and there was a hint of happiness on his face. This was rarely seen on his face, which usually looked ghastly. However, with Su Ming's experience, he could tell that there was no falsehood in the sincerity shown on his face. I came to the land of berserkers to search for a chance to break through ascendance and move into the second step. Fellow Taoist Oriole, I can tell that your level of cultivation is very unique. You must have reached a critical moment. If both of us can reach a breakthrough, then we'll fight again. Shindong looked at Su Ming, then brought out a gourd from his storage bag and took a big swig from it. We still have a third move. Do you want to fight? Shindong put down the pot of wine and started laughing loudly. Of course we will. Su Ming also laughed loudly. The two of them looked at each other, and no hatred could be seen in each other's eyes. However, there was a glint of unwillingness to admit defeat shining at the same time. What I'm going to cast is a divine ability I obtained by chance when I was in the land of immortals. This art should have been left behind by the ancient immortals. I practiced it for many years, but I still can't completely master it. This art is called the Seven Abyssal Death Seal. With my current level of cultivation, I can execute the power of one seal. Fellow Taoist Oriole, watch carefully. Once Shindong said those words, he suddenly bit the tip of his tongue and coughed out a mouthful of blood. That blood abruptly exploded, and when it scattered in all directions, 7 blurry illusions manifested. Once those 7 illusions appeared, an incomparably thick and vast wave of aura of death instantly surged forth from all directions. Once it was completely absorbed by the 7 illusions, the 7 illusions revealed themselves to be rather clear. They were 7 people wearing crowns and verdant abyssal robes. Their faces could not be seen clearly, but there was a mighty pressure that made Su Ming's heart tremble, spreading out from their bodies. Immediately after, the 7 shadows in verdant abyssal robes lifted their right hands. With a swing of their arms, the weather changed, and the entire area changed. The sky could no longer be seen, and it was enveloped by a layer of green aura. At the same time, the 7 shadows in verdant abyssal robes also disappeared. But right at the instant they disappeared, a great sense of danger rose swiftly from under Su Ming's feet. When Su Ming lowered his head, his pupils shrank. He saw that the ground that had been replaced by the green fog had turned into a gigantic mark. That mark was green, and it was exuding a mighty pressure that caused Su Ming's heart to tremble. It looked as if it could activate at any moment and bring forth the destructive power of the 7 Abyssal Death Seal. However, this gigantic mark was not centered around Su Ming. He was at the edge of the mark, and at the instant he looked over, Shundong's low shout reverberated in the air. Piercing green light instantly erupted from the mark in the green fog. That light covered everything around it, but there were no loud booms, no shocking ripples of power. When the light disappeared, Su Ming was still standing on the ground, and Shundong was standing in the distance with a pale face. The green fog disappeared, and the 7 Abyssal Death Seal also disappeared along with it. However, the ground several thousands of feet away from where Su Ming was now empty. That empty space spanned 100 lis, and from the distance, it looked as if a gigantic pit had appeared in that place, because that part of the ground had disappeared. Even the sky over there had turned indistinct. In fact, there was even a gigantic hole at the top of the sky that was slowly closing up. Su Ming fell silent. Shundong's breathing quickened. After some time, he looked at Su Ming, and a smile appeared on his face. Fellow Taoist Oriole, this art might only be one seal, but how powerful is it? Su Ming closed his eyes, and after several breaths, he opened them and wrapped his fist in his palm to bow toward Shindong. He did not answer Shindong's question, but instead lifted his right hand with the back of his hand facing the sky, and his palm facing the ground. If my palm is the passage of time, if one side represents the past, if the other side represents the future, Su Ming mumbled softly. For the first time ever, his hair, which had been dyed black by Ugly Little Things family, faded away to reveal the mixture of white and purple on his head, revealing a head of hair that would make people's hearts tremble in fear. At the same time, The astonishing sight of time flowing backwards appeared in the area once Su Ming waved his hand after he said those words. Shandong's eyes went wide, and disbelief, as well as shock, appeared on his face. He looked at the land and sky around him with a dumbfounded expression. Time was flowing backwards rapidly, and he watched the pit in the distance disappear. The hole in the sky also disappeared, and he saw a gigantic verdant abyssal seal appearing in the space between the land and sky once again. When he saw all of this, Shandong sucked in a sharp breath. What is this divine ability? Shandong's heart trembled, and he suddenly felt fortunate that he had not thought of killing Su Ming under the verdant abyssal seal just now. Or else, Su Ming looked at the verdant abyssal seal in the restored world, and a strange light appeared in his eyes as he observed it carefully. With his heart as his drawing board and his soul as his brush, he looked as if he was copying it. If you like this work, please come Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.